What's up? Ghost Fictions is here, and we're back again. This is a story where Issei left the Gremorys and married Sona and Serafall. Issei was betrayed from the beginning, unknowingly defines his new path after being expelled from the Gremory Clan. But before we start, please consider subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Don't forget to check the description for more informations. Also, this is a translate version. You may find some mistakes, specifically in the character's gender. Issei of course is a male, this time, no changes in the gender. Well, with that out, let's get into the story. Prologue. Sona Citri watched sadly as Ria's last chance faded before her eyes. Hyodo Issei lost the rematch against Riser Phoenix by a very small margin, or rather, due to the intervention of someone unexpected. Revo Phoenix tried to save her brother, managing with this distraction to make the brown-haired boy stop his final attack, which was taken advantage of by the blonde attacking the boy. He watched in horror as the fire headed towards them, so he took the girl in his arms before they were reached by the flames. Lord and Lady Phoenix stifled a cry of terror at their third son's action. When it was all over, a brunette was seen with the upper part of his body naked, showing his back full of burns, denoting that he took the full impact. He slowly placed an unharmed and unconscious Revel on the ground, before glancing coldly at Riser over his shoulder. Sona could see how the Phoenix heir turned pale and backed away, and then the brunette closed his eyes and fell into unconsciousness. Right now several demons were murmuring amongst themselves about the duel. Some were surprised by the Security's near victory, while others repudiated him for being a low-class devil. In the middle of the room, Rias held the brunette against her chest, while her hair covered her eyes. "I am sorry, Bucho. I couldn't win," the brunette said with difficulty and barely a whisper of voice. Then the redhead directed her hand to the boy's chest without saying anything. It was then that a magic circle was formed in him. Serzex, Lord and Lady Gremory as well as the Phoenixes opened their eyes as they recognized the spell used. Ark! A chilling cry of pain came from the boy's throat. Sona and Tsubaki watched in shock as one by one the pawn pieces left the brown-haired boy's body. Akena looked away, Koneko closed her eyes, and Kiba clenched his fists at the sight. They were already expecting this to happen since they already knew her true colors, but that didn't mean it was easy to deal with. Seeing him hurt one of his teammates. Rias. What? Mao Lucifer didn't finish his question. He could see the icy expression his sister had as she pulled out the pieces from inside her servant. "I thought you could be of use to me, but I see I was wrong," he said in a voice devoid of emotion. Everyone watched in shock as the redhead didn't flinch at the heart-wrenching screams of the boy in her arms. "There's no point in keeping you in my title, so I'll take back what's mine," he said as the last piece began to emerge from the boy. He felt his heart tear apart. Literally. "Partner." A certain dragon sealed inside him exclaimed worriedly. The other pieces had come out without causing any serious damage to the naked eye, but this last one was making its way through the boy's flesh. So this one finished coming out. A large hole could be seen in his chest, while his heart could be seen beating with difficulty due to the destroyed state of said organ. The affront for intervening in this event is death. Knowing Riser, he would torture you before killing you, so consider this the payment for your efforts, a quick death, he said as he slowly left him on the ground. As best he could, the brown-haired boy focused on her with difficulty, while blood came out abundantly from the hole that the piece left in his chest, right where his heart was. He could see the girl's blank gaze, who looked at him with indifference. "Partner, I told you. She wasn't who she said she was," the dragon said in a distressed tone. "Rias. What the hell have you done?" Sona exclaimed, running towards the boy. She took it carefully, holding her head high, looking worriedly at the fatal wound, then looked at her childhood friend demanding answers with her gaze. This brought everyone present out of their stupor. "Nothing that should interest you," the girl replied coldly. Sona couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Why you? You didn't used to be like this," the black-haired girl argued furiously. A blue glow appeared on his hands indicating that he was using healing magic on the brown-haired boy. "It's true, I didn't used to be like this. But since this situation became inevitable, I found myself in need of becoming strong in order to endure my fate. If you have any complaints, then there are the people responsible for it," she said while nodding contemptuously towards her parents and brother. They lowered their gaze at the justified accusation. He then looked at Riser, who was smiling in amusement at what was happening. "You should stop that stupid smile. I will soon break this engagement. What happened today has shown me that the possibility is within my reach and faster than I thought, she said while looking at him neutrally. The blonde was about to protest, but he froze in place. He could see how a dark aura surrounded the redhead for a second, letting him feel an insane amount of power emerging from her. In short, she was more powerful than him. Then the thought came to his mind that this whole circus and the rating game were for the purpose of testing and analyzing his chances of victory. In short, she had everyone dancing in her hand. And that shook him. Rias then looked back at Sona, who was trying to save the boy's life. It's useless, not even reincarnating will save him, his body won't withstand the process, he said while pointing with his hand. A magic circle shone beneath the boy on the ground. Rias! Sona exclaimed upon seeing this. As a reflex she evoked her own magic as she clung tighter to the boy. Tsubaki stood next to her, king, while imitating her. In a flash, both Citri disappeared from the spot next to the boy's body, leaving the place in complete silence. Rias lowered her hand and the magic circle disappeared. The redhead looked for a few seconds at the pool of blood that the brown-haired boy had left on the living room floor, before closing her eyes and turning her back on the Mao and her parents. Rias, Serzex muttered in an affected tone. The girl simply walked away from the elder demons at a slow and steady pace, not deigning to look at them at any time. I think it will be best to discuss this in private, Lord Gremory said, his face darkened by the events of this evening. He never thought that the pressure of being forced to marry someone she didn't want would force his daughter to kill her feelings and see everyone else as disposable tools. I'm sorry about what happened, but we'll discuss important things right now, so you can all leave, Patriarch Phoenix explained before leaving the hall with the Mao and the Gremory. The demons invited to the celebration looked at each other with doubt, before leaving the place. Citri territory. Sona and Tsubaki had just appeared at the gates of Citri Castle with the dying Issei, before the astonished gaze of some servants seeing her covered in blood. What are you waiting for? Call my parents, now! She screamed desperately. They ran to find the patriarchs without wasting time. Come on, don't give up. Hyodo, the heiress murmured in an affected voice. The Citri and Gremory clans were the clans that showed the most affection towards their servants. Naturally, seeing her best friend discard one of her servants before her eyes filled her with sadness and rage. For his part, Issei was disoriented, unable to distinguish his surroundings. The only thing that reigned in his mind were those icy, affectionless eyes that Rias gave him. He remembered that he could see some things while he was in the Gremory group, but he never paid attention to them. When he prepared to go to the underworld, Drake had told him that the sacrifice he was making for the redhead was not worth it, but he didn't listen. Then a wet and at the same time warm sensation came to his face. Tears. But they weren't his. As best he could, he focused his vision, noticing a pair of violet eyes looking at him with concern and some fear. Taicho. He thought as he recognized the student council president. She cried helplessly seeing that her parents were taking too long, and that at any moment this boy would die without her being able to do anything. His healing magic was not enough to cure the severe damage from the extraction of his evil piece. Issei did not understand it. Why was she crying for someone like him? This was the doubt that arose in his mind, but he was also able to realize something. It's warm, he thought as he felt the girl's tears fall on his cheek. He still remembered Rias's tears for him when they lost the rating game, and Riser almost killed him, because unlike them, they were cold and devoid of feelings, but until now he accepted it. Partner, I think you've already realized, said the dragon. Yes, but I don't blame her. I blame myself for being weak. I know that circumstances turned her into someone manipulative, cold, and without any feeling to be able to bear the emotional burden, the boy told him. The dragon just listened in silence to its bearer. He was surprised that even at death's door, his host thought with a cool head while analyzing every detail that was leading him to death. But above all, that he didn't feel any hatred towards the redhead. Apparently he also had a side that was unknown even to his parents. An analytical and calculating side, as well as great instinct, which was boosted when he was given his arm, turning him into part dragon. Somehow I already knew it, but I still wanted to repay her by giving me my life back. Even if she herself pulled the strings from the shadows to have your power in her hands, he said, while a slight resigned smile formed on his face. He always thought about it, but when he came to the same conclusion he pretended not to understand. Then he looked at the girl in front of him. I couldn't hear his voice. I only saw how his lips moved and his helpless expression upon seeing him in such a deplorable state. He never thought that someone who was serious, cold, and unperturbed could show such concern for him. Taisho. No, Sona, don't cry. He thought when he saw her in that state. His face was stained with blood. His blood. He could tell that unlike Rias, Sona had no hidden intentions, or at least that's what his instincts told him. His dying eyes were able to see the real Sona just as they saw the real Rias, so he wondered what would have happened if she had approached him instead of the redhead. She would surely have tried to talk to him face to face, instead of arriving as if sent from heaven in his moments closest to death. Yes, that was the kind of person Sona was. His brief thoughts were interrupted when he got lost in the image of the Citri heiress. He scanned every feature of her expression in detail, realizing something that made him smile again. Now that I see her better, she really does seem like a very beautiful girl without her usual serious expression. But what do I think? I think I'm already delirious. He thought with a small mental laugh. For his part, the dragon remained silent, weighing his options. This boy had earned his respect, therefore, he would not let him die. Then he made a decision. Partner, if you had a chance to live, would you take it? Even if you go back to living as a demon? He asked with unusual seriousness. The brown-haired boy smiled warmly, leaving Sona and Tsubaki speechless at that, as they had not expected that gesture from the boy, whose life was beginning to fade away in front of them. If it is to prevent my parents, my friends and Kaisho from shedding their tears, then I would gladly accept that opportunity, he answered instantly. The image of his parents, of his friends Matsuda and Motohama, came to his mind. Last but not least, the person who was trying to save him right now. Then he felt a familiar weight on his shattered chest. Sona and Tsubaki watched in disbelief as the boy's shattered and exposed heart was quickly reconstructed. However, they could notice how this was something different from a normal human heart. It wasn't a visible difference, but they could feel it somehow. You better reincarnate him quickly, Sona Citri, or this opportunity will be lost and my companion will die irremediably. They heard a voice say. Their gazes turned to the torso of his left hand, in which a green sphere shone. Asiseki Sekurute, the Citri heiress stammered. Even Tsubaki opened her eyes at what was happening. I turned his heart into that of a dragon, but it won't be enough. He needs a huge energy boost for the process to finish and my partner to be saved. The dragon explained in a deep voice. Sona opened her mouth slightly at the implication of those words, then pulled out her parts case with trembling hands, not caring about staining the kimono she was wearing even more with blood. The Citri heiress then looked at her remaining pieces for a couple of seconds, before taking the piece that could possibly fulfill the objective. She didn't have her 8 pawn pieces like Rias, but she still had her single mutated piece and hoped it would be enough. In the name of the Citri clan, walk this world again as my servant, he recited in the firmest voice he could manage in this situation. At that moment, the Citri patriarchs along with a girl dressed as a magical girl arrived at the castle gates, while a flash covered the place completely. When the glow stopped, they could see how the girl held the head of a brown-haired boy on her legs while he was lying on the ground. The pale color her skin had acquired was fading, returning to a healthier tone. The healing effect of Sona's power was slowly closing the wound in her chest, although a scar would remain as a reminder of this day. Then the boy stretched out his hand, until he placed it on the cheek of the Citri heiress, which he caressed while delicately wiping away the tears that were still running down them. From this moment on, my life belongs to you, Sona Citri, he declared with a warm and grateful look. The boy knew that his words and his decision were the right ones when he saw how the tears began to appear again, but the gleam of relief and joy in the girl's eyes indicated that she was happy and not sad like before. Good heavens, look at you causing all this fuss, the girl said with a small smile. The boy smiled at his new mistress's words. Sona removed her glasses to wipe away her tears, then put them back on and looked at her new servant. From now on you are part of my family, Hiyodo Issei, Sona said looking at him seriously. The boy noticed that despite regaining his serious face, the girl showed relief in her eyes. The newcomers didn't know what had happened, but it seemed Sona had a new servant in her group. Tsubaki let out a sigh she didn't know what she was holding, before giving the boy a smile. Welcome to the Citri clan. Hiyodo Issei-kun, he said in a kind tone. The boy returned the smile as he closed his eyes. Chapter 1. First Step. A trio of students stood at the gates of Citri Castle, being a pair of black-haired girls in party dresses and a brown-haired boy, the latter lying on the ground while his head was in the lap of one of the girls. The brown-haired boy tried to get up, but a gentle touch on his chest stopped him. He raised his gaze, only to see the Citri heiress shaking her head with her usual serious expression. "You are still weak," was his simple answer. Issei nodded, as he leaned back against the girl's thighs. "His skin is soft. And he smells very good," he thought, enjoying the closeness of his new king. The dragon inside him had a drop on the back of his neck at the thoughts of his bearer. "Even though you were practically dead, you don't change, partner," Drake thought with a resigned snort. It was then that a certain group of people approached Kuo's students. "Sona, could you tell me, what's all the fuss about?" a man asked in an uncertain tone. He had long black hair tied in a small ponytail, with a thin beard and semi-rimless glasses that covered his sharp blue eyes, which looked calculatingly at the boy lying on the girl's legs. He wore a high-quality black suit and had an elegant demeanor. Next to him came a beautiful woman with black hair and a side ponytail and violet eyes, whose features were less harsh than the man's, and she saw everything with a small enigmatic smile. She was wearing an elegant dark violet cocktail dress. A girl also came who was curiously dressed as a Mahu Xiaozhou. She had black hair tied in twin pigtails, as well as bright violet eyes that reflected naivety and a certain mischief. The most striking thing was that she had large breasts for her childish appearance. For some reason he felt strange under her gaze, because deep down she conveyed a feeling that he could not define very well. With them came several servants from the castle. Lord Citri, Lady Citri, Serafall Sama. Tsubaki bowed upon seeing them arrive. The brown-haired boy opened his eyes upon learning that they were the parents of his king, so he tried to stand up and greet them respectfully, but the heiress once again did not let him get back up. "Not yet," Sona said in a commanding tone. The brown-haired boy sighed at his king's behavior, but he had to be grateful, since he was beginning to notice how the pain in his chest and minor wounds were slowly going away. He also noticed how in that position Sona's energy entered his body, remembering the times Rias did the same to him. Apparently it wasn't necessary to be naked for this, so he deduced that it was Rias's way of keeping him under control using her perverted nature. "So, who is this young man?" "Apparently he is your new servant recently," Lady Citri said, looking at him softly. The visible and healing wounds, as well as the scar over his heart, indicated to him that he had been through a bad time, so he proceeded with the greatest tact he could, as well as the kind tone he used with his servants. Sona tensed slightly, as she thought about how to approach the subject, but the boy beat her to the punch. "My name is Haida Issei, Sona Citri's new servant and the current secretary." It was the boy's introduction. This caused Lord Citri's glasses to move in shock, Lady Citri to open her eyes in surprise, and Serafall to smile with satisfaction at her little sister's achievement. She had managed to find a wielder of one of the 13, Longinus, but mostly a mid-level one. But then a doubt came to his mind as he remembered something. "Any Dragon-kun, weren't you supposed to be Serzexchan's little sister's servant?" the magical girl asked doubtfully. Sona cursed her sister's tactlessness in asking that specifically. For her part, Tsubaki was worried about her new peerage partner at the question asked. The brunette had his eyes covered by his hair, while everyone felt the tension growing. The Citri patriarchs paid attention to this. "Let's just say, my services were no longer required in the Gremory Clan. Although I'm not complaining, I feel that from now on things will be better," the brown-haired boy responded. She did this when the shadows stopped covering her eyes, drawing a small smile as she looked softly at her new king. Sona noticed this and couldn't help but smile back. The brown-haired boy then blinked in bewilderment before looking doubtfully at the Mahu Xiaozhou. "By the way, who are you?" Issei asked upon realizing that detail. This made Sona and Tsubaki have a drop on the back of their necks, while the former prepared herself for what was coming. For her part, the girl smiled widely as she began to make extravagant movements. "I am magical girl, Serafall Leviathan. Call me Leviathan," she finished by striking a pose, winking and sticking her tongue out playfully. The servants of Citri Castle clapped reflexively, while the brunette had a drop on the back of his neck and Sona massaged her temple. Then Issei realized something. "Wait. Did you say Leviathan? That means..." the boy deduced with a surprised expression. "Yes, my sister is one of the Yandai Mao," Sona clarified with a sigh. Issei was stunned by such information. Minutes later, a fully mature Issei looked at Citri Castle in amazement. "Your house is amazing, Kaicho," the brown-haired boy muttered as he looked at the enormous building. Then his gaze wandered around the huge garden and he was intimidated by its vast size. The black-haired girl looked somewhat amused by her new servant's stunned expression. "Let's go in, I have to talk to my parents, and you have to put on new clothes," the heiress declared in a serious tone. The brown-haired boy looked at her seriously for what she had said. It was obvious that he would inform his parents about what had happened, which didn't bother him but was a little uncomfortable. But upon hearing the second, he couldn't help but notice that he did indeed need a change of clothes since he was only wearing his pants and shoes, which were quite battered. "I understand, Sona-sama," he replied with the utmost respect. This action made Sona a little uncomfortable since it did not fit with the boy's already known personality. But she did not say anything, she would have time to talk to him when she attended to important matters. "You guys, take Hyoto-kun for a change of clothes, but first let him take a bath, then take him to the dining room where dinner will be served soon," Lady Citri ordered in a firm tone to a group of maids. "Hi," they answered while two girls took him by the arms. The brunette opened his eyes and tensed at the contact, this being noticed by the Citri patriarchs and the Mao. "This way, Hyoto-san," they said in a friendly tone. Issei let out a sigh, before nodding and then bowing to the Citri family and letting the maids guide him into the castle. "You should change those clothes too, Sona," Lady Citri said to her daughter. She blinked in doubt, before looking down at herself and noticing that her kimono was stained with blood. She summoned her magic and after a flash she was clean and dressed in her academy uniform. Tsubaki imitated her, king, and also used magic to change into her uniform. Following this, Patriarch Citri and Serafall entered the castle, followed by Sona and her queen, who noticed that they were heading in the direction of Lord Citri's personal office. When they arrived, Tsubaki was the last to enter the office as she closed the door. "So, what do you have to tell us, Sona?" Lord Citri asked in a serious tone. He was sitting at his desk with Lady Citri and Serafall standing behind him. Sona and Tsubaki looked at each other for a second, before the Citri heiress stepped forward and began to tell how the brunette became involved in the supernatural world just a month ago. Bathrooms. The boy in question was stripped of his clothes by the maid, while he closed his eyes tightly in shame as he let them do it. Normally she would refuse or resist out of modesty, but she considered this to be something normal among high-class devils, so she suppressed her embarrassment and uneasiness as much as she could. He didn't want to embarrass Sona, so he endured the situation, plus his body wasn't responding to him being paralyzed. Somehow he felt numb with shame. "Ara, it's big," one of the maids muttered when she removed the last item of clothing. This comment made him react, so he moved his hands to his crotch to hide his little dragon with his face completely red, but it was too late. Since Issei hadn't opened his eyes at any point, he missed the lewd expressions of all the maids upon seeing that part of his anatomy, and even some of them had a small nosebleed. Lucky Sona-sama, they thought in sync with some envy. The all-for-honor mentioned had blushed out of nowhere in the middle of her explanation without knowing why. "Come in, Issei-sama," one of them said, guiding him into the bathroom. He simply resigned himself and let it happen. The others removed their clothes to cover themselves with small towels and then enter, causing the boy to have a slight nosebleed when he saw so much bare skin. A pervert will always be a pervert. The boy was immediately attended to, feeling his arms, chest and back being washed using her breasts and lots of soap. He could feel the softness of those feminine forms through the damp towels, giving him shivers in his crotch that he suppressed with willpower. It must be said that the brown-haired boy felt somewhat intimidated by these actions on the part of those girls, and that is why he could not fully enjoy what in the past he would call nirvana. Obviously it was something he hadn't noticed, but a certain resident inside did notice it, which worried him. After the bath the boy was dressed in expensive clothes, to his discomfort. When everything was over, the brunette looked at himself in the mirror, seeing that the formal suit suited him too well for his taste. "It's time, Issei-sama," said one of the maids. The boy gulped at what was possibly coming, but took a deep breath before looking at the maid. "Please guide me," he replied with a somewhat serious expression and the firmest tone he could manage after everything that had happened. Lord Citri's office. A deep silence reigned in the place after the heiress Citri recounted Issei's journey in the supernatural world. The fallen angel's deception certainly caught the attention of Lady Citri and Serafall, but knowing how it was discarded by Rias Gremory worried them greatly. Not to mention that reaction the boy had when he was taken by the castle maids. That set off alarm bells for the two Citri women. Serafall had her gaze downcast, looking slightly thoughtful as Lady Citri glanced at her from the corner of her eye. On the other hand, Lord Citri kept his eyes closed, calmly analyzing everything he heard. I see. Hyodo-kun has had a lot of regrettable disappointments in the short time he has been in our world, but I am sure that in our bosom he will be able to flourish and develop properly, he declared as he opened his eyes, noticing a slight warm glow towards his daughter. She was surprised by her father's words, but she couldn't help but feel happy that they supported her. After all, he was practically presumed dead and his return would cause controversy, placing the Gremory clan under the gaze of the entire demon world. In that case, I would recommend that you stay here at the castle for a couple of weeks. Since we must check your current condition and the repercussions of the latest events on your new life, it was Lady Citri's turn. She was referring to the dragonification process that her heart underwent and the possible consequences of that, without forgetting that her left arm also had that detail. I understand, I honestly thought the same thing, Sona said while absent-mindedly cleaning her glasses. Tsubaki also had that in mind, plus it wouldn't be convenient for her to return to school and meet up with the Gremory clan so soon. Sona, you and Tsubaki can go ahead, I have things to discuss with your mother and Serafall, Lord Citri ordered firmly. The All for Honor mention looked a little worried, but upon seeing her father's calm gaze she dismissed that feeling from her chest. I understand, let's go Tsubaki, he said as he walked away. Hi Kaicho, with your permission. The All for Honor mention responded, then bowed before following her, King. When the door closed, the temperature dropped suddenly. What do you think, Serafall? Lord Citri asked, unfazed by the change in temperature. Those elders have a lot to do with it. I'm sure they pressured Serzex to continue the duel despite the interference, she replied in a neutral voice. The bubbly girl was gone and now the true face of Serafall Leviathan was revealed. They should have stopped him when Ravil Phoenix intervened, but their ambition to obtain another super demon so as not to appear weak to the other factions brought out the worst in them, Lady Citri commented seriously. And because of that they have lost the Sekiryute, they will surely be more careful with their movements from now on, Lord Citri finished saying. Anyway, for now we must prepare for the return of the Sekiryute within the Citri clan, the Citri matriarch said pleased. Serafall relaxed her expression a little at her mother's words. That's true, I'll take advantage and give him a hand so he grows and becomes a worthy guardian for Sona, the Mao commented, crossing her arms and smiling slightly. At this, both patriarchs raised an eyebrow. Ara, you look quite happy, daughter, Lady Citri said, covering her mouth elegantly. It's just satisfaction, nothing more, nothing less haha-yui, he responded, assuming his serious expression again. Without further ado, he headed for the exit of the office. Sotan, Oni-chan is coming over there, she exclaimed bubbly as she rushed down the hallway. Oh Oni-sama, behave yourself, was heard in the distance. At this, Lord Citri muttered in a low tone. I don't like seeing her like that, he said in an affected tone. Afufu, perhaps the arrival of that young man will change some things around here, especially regarding Serafall, Lady Citri commented with a laugh. A glimmer of hope could be seen in his eyes. Lord Citri looked at her for a few seconds before sighing. Then they both followed their eldest daughter into the dining room. Gremory Castle. Currently, Lord Gremory and Lord Phoenix were discussing Rias and Riser's marriage contract. And they had come to a conclusion. Then the union is cancelled, Lord Phoenix declared. Serzex felt a sense of bitter triumph, for this decision was due to the fateful events of that day. He was going to declare Issei the winner when Ravil intervened, but his father told him that the Demon Council had decided to overlook that detail. Obviously he didn't like that decision, but as Mao he couldn't do anything else to intervene in the matter. Now both patriarchs came to the conclusion that things could get dangerous if they pressed the matter. That's right, Rias is not going through a good time and perhaps this is something we will regret later if we continue with the original plan, Lord Gremory said. Riser also shows himself to be too immature for a responsibility like this. Look at him putting his sister in danger by not keeping a cool head, Lady Phoenix said with concern. The Phoenix patriarchs lowered their heads at the memory of their daughter being attacked by her brother, only to be saved by that brave pawn, losing the battle in the process and his life after the Gremory heiress expelled him from her peerage. The saddest thing is that they could never thank him for that act. Yes, they already thought the brown-haired boy was dead. After all, that method of extracting the evil piece meant the death of the servant without exception. Normally this process was done by the creator of the evil piece, Ajuka Beelzebub, thus granting the servant's freedom. However, the king was also capable of doing so if necessary, although its consequences were more severe to the point of killing the servant in the worst cases, especially when they had more than one piece in their bodies. Lord Gremory closed his eyes in regret, thinking of such a young and promising life wasted. He still had to talk to his daughter about it, but something told him that conversation wouldn't be pretty. Then that's it, we retreat, Theodicus, Lord Phoenix said. I'm sorry about all this. What our ambition has caused, Lady Phoenix said in an affected tone. The image of the boy on the verge of death was still fresh in his mind. The red-haired man shook his head. Don't regret it, the mistake was mine, Odelia, Reynard, Lord Gremory replied. They bowed to the Mao before disappearing. Both redheads remained silent, until the Mao spoke. Ka-Sam won't be very happy to know this, Serzex said. He was referring to the hidden face that Rias created to protect herself from them. Theodicus sighed. After all, Serzex had regretted the marriage agreement upon meeting the third son of the Phoenix, but he and his wife refused to accept their son's reasons for backing out. You were right, we really did make a grave mistake, Lord Gremory replied. Without further ado, they both looked towards the stairs that led to the second floor, and therefore to Rias's room. It's time, we must talk to her, said a voice behind both men. They shuddered at the discontent in his voice, but they also noticed a certain tinge of sadness in it. It was Venelana Gremory, mother of Serzex and Rias respectively. She came with Graphia. The redheads nodded and the four of them headed upstairs. Rias's room. Rias looked out at the underworld sky from her terrace, the wind blowing against her face. The image of his pawn, still fresh in his mind. She had felt something stir at that moment, but she didn't hesitate to finish her task to save him the suffering of being tortured by Riser. Despite everything, the boy earned their respect by putting Riser on the ropes, and so it was the most merciful thing anyone in his position could have done. He closed his eyes. There was no point in thinking about it anymore, since I would never see him again. Not even the Citri with their vast medical knowledge could save him from the fatal fate after extracting his evil piece. Akeno, Kiba and Koneko looked worriedly at the neutrality on their mistress's face, as they could notice a slight touch of melancholy in her gaze. They didn't say anything, but they knew that this time something was different. Perhaps carrying the Welsh dragon made the brown-haired man able to influence the redhead and make her a little more human, but that was why they were worried, since despite that, he did not hesitate to condemn his companion. They wondered if that would affect their king's future, especially if she became the Rias who once helped them and gave them a second chance. Something that they longed for despite its possible repercussions. Knock. Knock. Rias, we need to talk, they heard the voice of the Gremory matriarch. Instantly they could see how the expression of their king turned icy and his gaze sharpened. The previous thought was instantly erased, seeing that their master had not changed and that perhaps they imagined that brief moment of melancholy in the eyes of their king. Go ahead, he said in a neutral tone, which gave them a chill. Yes, they definitely imagined it. She turned towards the door, meeting two pairs of blue eyes, one violet and one silver. The quartet of devils shuddered at the ice blue in Rias's eyes, which conveyed an enormous coldness and lack of humanity. Mao. What have we done? The Gremory thought when they saw that expression. Citri Castle. Issei was feeling quite uncomfortable. This was due to the silence that reigned at the Citri clan table. He felt the gaze of the Citri patriarchs on him, but above all, that of the Mao Leviathan, something that made him extremely uncomfortable. Hyodo-kun, let me welcome you to the Citri clan, the Citri patriarch said surprisingly. He had his cup raised, being imitated by Lady Citri, Serafall, Sona and Tsubaki. Issei was surprised by this action. Regardless of your title, I know that you will go far in our society, so I ask that when that time comes, you continue to support my daughter. These were the serious and honest words of Lord Citri. The brown-haired boy could see the sincerity in his words, so he quickly formulated a response that corresponded to Patriarch Citri's feelings. Sona-sama has my appreciation, respect and loyalty from now on. That is why from this moment I declare that I will use my power to support the Citri house, as well as the people important to me, she said decisively. This was reinforced when his left arm changed into the boosted gear, which he wielded tightly. Both Citri patriarchs were surprised to notice an intense fire in the boy's gaze, while at the same time they felt calmer. Serafall smiled with a certain arrogance for a few seconds, before looking at him with stars in her eyes, true to her way of being. Tsubaki's mouth was slightly open, while a light pink adorned her cheeks. On the other hand, Sona was extremely disoriented by such a statement, and without realizing it, she looked at her new servant with a soft and warm look that was unusual for her. I am pleased to hear that, Lord Citri replied, returning to his plate. Then the next one to speak was Lady Citri. Hyodo-kun, I have spoken with my husband as well as my daughters. You will stay in our home for a couple of weeks so that you can get used to the changes in your body, and so that I can get to know my daughter Sona's new servant better, Matriarch Citri explained. This took the boy by surprise, who looked at her with doubt and uncertainty. I will take care of covering for you at school and with your parents. You should know that Asia Argento will most likely be relocated and her memory will be erased. It was Sona's turn. She had a neutral expression, but inside she was worried about the brunette's reaction. He looked at her for a second, before letting out a resigned sigh. I guess it's because I'm dead, he said in an affected tone. He could see a slight glint of worry in his, King's, eyes, so he didn't put much emphasis on how affected he was by what Sona had said. After all, the blonde was very attached to his heart, and knowing that she would forget all the moments they spent together hurt him deeply. I'll make sure your parents don't get involved in this, since you'll be returning home in a while, Sona added, adjusting her glasses. The brown-haired boy nodded as he brought a bite to his mouth. Let's leave those topics for the moment, and enjoy this welcome banquet. That was what Lord Citri said. The rest nodded and went to their plates. Dinner continued in silence, which despite being absolute was not uncomfortable. Issei stopped thinking about Asia, to analyze those present. Despite looking serious, the brunette noticed that Lord Citri was extremely kind. Lady Citri was elegant, but at the same time humble, although from time to time he noticed that she looked at him analytically. Serafall was too carefree and childish, but despite that, she gave him a strange feeling that he couldn't quite define. Sona remained calm and serious, but he knew that she was not cold, and that she cared about him and therefore, her servants. Tsubaki was a little more expressive than her new king, but he didn't know her well enough so he still didn't know what to think of her. With Sona it was different because she dropped her analytical mask when he saved her life and so one could already get an idea of the kind of person she was. When dinner ended, the brown-haired boy was called by his king, to which he followed her through the halls of the castle, not without first thanking her for the food and commenting that it was extremely delicious. Lord and Lady Citri smiled at the comment, while the servants were happy that their efforts were noticed. They realized that the boy had been sincere in expressing himself. When they reached the end of the road, he could see that they were in front of a large wooden door. In this place we will review and analyze your capabilities after your heart and left arm turned into dragon hearts, said a voice behind them. The brunette was startled, only to see the Citri patriarchs and the Mao behind him, with Lady Citri being the one who had spoken. Tsubaki also came with them. He only remembered having the company of his king when they left the table. It seems you didn't notice when we joined you, Lord Citri commented calmly. Sorry, I had some things on my mind, the boy said, scratching the back of his neck somewhat embarrassed. Lord Citri shook his head. I understand that you've been through a lot today. I even doubt that you can sleep and that's why we had agreed to test you tonight, said the patriarch. Issei remained silent, because now that he remembered it was too late. Tsubaki and I are leaving since we have to attend the academy tomorrow. I know that my parents will take good care of you so I don't worry, was what Sona said. The brunette nodded, before taking a step towards her, bewildering those present. Thanks for everything you've done for me, he said with an extremely grateful look. The girl was surprised to see this, especially since no one had ever looked at her that way. Unlike Rias, she had not reincarnated anyone on the verge of death, but had spoken to her candidates, and from there they were reincarnated upon accepting her proposal. Composing herself, the girl adjusted her glasses and smiled slightly. You don't have to thank me, I just did what I thought was right at the time, was his simple response as he turned around. The brown-haired boy smiled at this, since he noticed the girl's discomfort, and assumed that it was the first time this had happened to her. Without further ado, the girl left, followed by Tsubaki. Good luck, Hyodo-kun. I wish for your companion before following Sona. The boy nodded with a slight smile. Thus he lost sight of his king and queen as they wandered into the halls of the place. Well, then let's go in now, Dragon-kun, Serafall said in a playful tone. The boy nodded, although this time his expression was serious. Then the doors opened and the 4 demons entered the room. A great darkness prevented him from seeing beyond his nose, at least until his vision adjusted and he could use his demon senses. Plash. Plash. A couple of claps were heard and the place lit up. The brown-haired boy had to cover his eyes due to the abrupt change between darkness and light. When the discomfort passed, he could see the inside of the place, which was a huge white room at least 300 meters long by 100 meters high. In one corner you could see weapons of all kinds, as well as armor and what appeared to be some kind of small golem. In the other corner there were several costumes and some props for theater scenes. "This is our training room, although it has been in use for a long time," that was what Lord Citri said. "Our daughter has a program here in the underworld. As you can see in this place she has kept some of her props." It was Lady Citri's comment with an amused smile. The brown-haired boy felt a drop on his neck when he heard that. "Anyway, now we will run tests to evaluate your current abilities, then we will go to our medical room to analyze your body and its recent changes in more detail." That was what Lord Citri said. The brown-haired boy nodded seriously. "Well, first we will start with a little meeting between you and my daughter," Lord Citri said upon seeing Serafall. She looked at the boy seriously while he was out of sight. For his part, the brown-haired boy blinked doubtfully upon hearing what Patriarch Citri had said. "Huh," he muttered, unable to process Lord Citri's words. "Just try to survive," he said as he and his wife walked away towards one of the walls. "Huh," the confused brown-haired boy said again. Then a chill ran down his spine, and then he saw the cause of such a sensation. Serafall was surrounded by a layer of power as she pointed her Mahu Shaojiu wand at him. "Let's have fun, Ikuin," he said as he unleashed his attack. "Holy Mao," he muttered before dodging for his life a blast of demonic power. "Don't worry about your wounds, the Citri clan has the best medical knowledge in the underworld," Lady Citri exclaimed with a small, amused smile. "That doesn't reassure me," the brown-haired boy screamed as he rolled on the ground dodging another blast of demonic power. The Citri patriarchs just watched everything with a small smile. The brown-haired boy was undoubtedly someone very interesting to see how Serafall was having fun. His usual childish mask was gone and for the first time in a long time he appeared carefree. "Damn it. Come on, Drake," he exclaimed after dodging another attack. His sacred gear had remained active since he activated it during dinner, something he had already expected since he had given his arm to Drake in order to access Balance Breaker for 10 seconds. If his arm looked normal upon arriving in Citri territory, he attributed it to Drake, who somehow forcibly ready-made the mutation in his arm. He put aside his mental wanderings to concentrate on the fight, causing the jewel of the boosted gear to shine brightly. Boost! It resonated in the place. The brunette opened his eyes as he felt a huge increase in his power with just one boost. "I'll explain later, now show them your fangs, partner," he heard the dragon say. In response, the brunette sharpened his gaze, beginning to dodge the attacks that came towards him as he advanced towards the Mao. The Citri patriarchs watched with interest as the boy tried to get closer to Serafall, while dodging his daughter's attacks with difficulty. It's not like he was seriously attacking. Boost! At first they noticed that he did it in a somewhat clumsy way, but then he began to move fluidly despite the fact that the Mao Leviathan increased the number of attacks in their form, as well as increasing the speed which the brown-haired man followed without problems. Thus, in less than 30 seconds he was only 3 meters away from his opponent. The brown-haired boy saw a gap between the Mao's attacks that he knew how to take advantage of, dodging in a zigzag pattern and coming face to face with Serafall. "Boost! Burst! Now!" he exclaimed as he extended his left hand towards her with a magic circle in his palm which radiated a great amount of energy. His intention was to deliver a powerful palm strike, but he didn't notice the frozen floor and slipped, losing concentration and therefore his initial intention for that accumulation of power. For her part, Serafall had created a gap to let the brown-haired boy pass, while preparing a stronger attack with her natural element that would knock him out. She was surprised that someone who has not been in the supernatural world for more than a month has this speed and reflexes, but she did not show it. When she had him in front of her, she smiled wolfishly as an icy aura covered her, slightly freezing the ground around her. "Oyasumane sai, Ikuin," he declared in a somewhat provocative tone and a small smile. She then unleashed a powerful beam of freezing energy at her opponent at point-blank range. But her eyes widened as she watched him dodge the attack at such close range and managed to hit her gently in the stomach. "Gah!" the brown-haired boy complained as he fell. The Mao lowered her gaze to the boy, who tried to stand up, only to slip again on the frozen floor and take her with him to the ground. Serafall was still shocked by what had happened earlier, so she didn't react in time when the boy grabbed her waist and took her with him, falling on top of her in the process. Then the brown-haired boy accidentally snapped his fingers, unleashing a certain technique on his opponent. Ras! It was the sound that resonated in the place, and then absolute silence reigned. "Ait." The brunette compelli neighed as he rubbed the back of his neck with his gloved hand and tried to get up. Then he felt a certain warmth overflowing into his right hand, which caused him to have a blank expression. Lord and Lady Citri watched what was happening in disbelief. The brunette closed his hand reflexively, enjoying the sensation in his palm. A moan was heard beneath him. His right knee also felt warm, while something was pressing down on it strongly. A sweet feminine scent with a hint of peppermint filled his nostrils as he began to sweat, and his face turned extremely red. Without thinking, he tightened his hand around the object again. I couldn't not. So loud, he heard the voice say in a halting manner. At the same time, he could feel something hardening in the middle of that soft and firm sensation in his palm, as well as the heat in his knee becoming more noticeable. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was going on, but he tried to calm himself down before looking down and confirming his suspicions. When he did, he realized that the soft sensation in his hand was one of Serafall's breasts, who was lying beneath him in an extremely compromising position. His knee was right between the Mao's legs, who looked at him with her eyes half closed and a big blush on her face while she breathed heavily and squeezed her legs together. As a plus, the Mao was completely naked, allowing him to see every inch of her immaculate skin. "Ikuin," she whispered in a low, fragile tone. The brunette's mind froze for a moment, before it turned to mush and flew off with a powerful nosebleed. Flush. The poor boy was instantly knocked unconscious. The Mao sat up again, covering her breasts with her arms as she breathed heavily, unable to believe what had happened. The stunned expression on his face spoke for itself. Patriarch Citri had a twitch in his eye at what he saw. "Ara," was the only thing Lady Citri said with a hand on her cheek and a smile. "You really are one of a kind, partner." That was what a resigned Drake said. Minutes later, a recovered Issei sat in Siza in front of Lord Citri, while an amused Lady Citri watched this from beside him. For her part, Serafall stood with her arms crossed and her gaze downcast as she recalled what had happened recently. Never in his entire life had he had such close contact with someone of the opposite sex. This was something new for her, so she didn't know what to think of her reaction to the brown-haired boy's daring touch, which caused a sensation of internal heat that still hadn't left her body. Proof of this was that she was rubbing her thighs discreetly while she held her Mahu Xiaozhou wand against her chest when she raised her gaze and looked at the boy. It must be said that despite having a serious expression, a slight blush could be seen on her cheeks. "We will leave this aside for the moment, but I warn you that you will have to take responsibility," Lord Citri said harshly, but with a certain amusement that did not go unnoticed by his wife. Despite this, Lord Citri was surprised. He still couldn't believe the feminine reaction his daughter had to that incident. She used to show her true colors when she was with her parents, resulting in a serious and calculating Serafall, while also being harsh and inflexible to a certain extent. This way of being was the result of the civil war years ago, which was only aggravated by being named Mao and assuming such enormous responsibility at such a young age. She showed her younger self to face everyone, which diverted attention away from her to a certain extent. This caused everyone to wonder how he was so efficient in his job at the Department of Foreign Affairs. Of course, it was Sona's birth that made him show a genuine smile again, giving him a powerful reason to continue in his position as Mao, as well as put up with the elders of the council. But despite loving her so much, he couldn't fully show his feelings, so he took on that energetic side that everyone knew about. She even made a Mahu Xiaozhou program that her sister admired so much when she was little. Naturally, her parents were worried because Serafall had forgotten something very important. And that was his own happiness. She had dedicated herself to her younger sister by being the light that brought her out of her darkness, to the point of forgetting herself. This made her think that perhaps this is the reason why Hyodo Issei had cracked that wall called Serafall Citri a little and made her react in that way. Someone who goes out of his way for another person, forgetting about himself. He thought as he looked at the boy's left arm and what it meant. Lord Citri allowed himself to smile slightly as an idea struck his mind. "Maybe you will be the one to take care of my daughters in the future," thought Patriarch Citri. He knew that he would be the guardian who would take care of Sona through Serafall's mouth, because she would take care of it, there was no doubt about that. However, she also sensed from the previous scene that the boy could be the one to return them to the old Serafall, the one who had dreams and hopes like a normal girl. For his part, the poor boy was crying internally for having ruined his image in front of the parents of his king, and one of the Yandai Mao on his first day in the Citri clan. "Hi," he responded in a docile tone to what Lord Citri had said. Now we need to talk to Drake-san, the patriarch said more calmly this time. What do you wish to know, Demon Citri? Drake said as the jewel on the boosted gear glowed a little with each word. Hyodo-kun demonstrated speed and reflexes that surpass a low-class devil. Lord Citri began to speak. I see what you're getting at. Well, that's because of his new condition. Drake began to explain. The Citri patriarchs paid attention to this, as did the Mao, who put aside her previous ramblings and assumed a serious expression. Now that my partner's heart is a dragon, his blood was also affected to a certain extent. This causes the dragon power to run through his body evenly, increasing certain traits in him. The dragon said. What are your traits, Drake-san? Serafall asked with some anxiety. His instincts, ability to adapt and assimilate experience have greatly increased. Similar to a true dragon, was his answer. The quartet of demons fell silent upon hearing what Drake said. I see, that's why he adapted to Serafall's attack method in such a short time, Lord Citri commented with a hand on his chin. While he didn't increase the difficulty all at once, Serafall remained above his capabilities at all times and he kept up with her. Your instincts will make you sensitive to danger to the point of reacting to it before even processing it. In short, it will be as if you foresaw the future. Let's call it a premonition. The dragon explained. His adaptability will allow him to adjust to the type of enemy he faces and the pace of battle, not to mention that by gaining experience faster he will be able to become stronger in a short time. That was what Lady Citri said. In essence, yes. Although that last characteristic will only help him for a certain time, at least he will be able to reach a respectable level of power if he makes good use of it and tries his best. The dragon commented with some hope. I see, that means he currently has what it takes to improve his abilities if he motivates himself enough. Serafall muttered as a foxy smile made its way across her face. The brown-haired boy swallowed loudly as he saw a certain sadistic gleam in the Mao's eyes. Well, now it's time to run some tests on you. We still need to see if there's something we're overlooking, and it's better to be informed than to regret it in the future for not taking the proper precautions, Lord Citri said, looking at the brown-haired boy with some concern. Issei nodded, seeing that expression, as it could be a danger if something went wrong in a confrontation against an enemy, or it could happen that his condition directly affected Sona and the others. Yes, I wouldn't like to see my little Sona sad, was Lady Citri's comment. I wouldn't want something to happen to Aikun either. It was Serafall's turn with the tone of a sad child. She had her mask back again. On the other hand, these comments surprised the boy, since he had not thought about that. Since we shared the table, you are already part of this family. Do not be surprised that we show concern for you, Issei-kun, Lord Citri said with a small smile. The brown-haired boy noticed that Sona had inherited her poker face from there, as well as most of the gestures he had seen her make, even that small but significant smile that Sona showed sometimes. I appreciate your concern, the boy said in a warm tone. Lord Citri nodded, before turning around while beckoning. Follow me, he indicated, starting to walk out of the room. The brown-haired boy did so instantly, followed by Lady Citri and Serafall. Then he realized something. That's right. Taicho didn't tell me which piece I was, he exclaimed in realization. The other three demons laughed at this. That's easy, you could only have been reincarnated with a specific piece, Lady Citri began. This caught Issei's attention instantly. Any Aikun, do you remember what pieces Rias-chan used to revive you? The Mao asked in an animated tone. The brown-haired boy looked at her doubtfully, but answered instantly. Sure, she said she used her 8 pawns, because the power inside me was great, the boy replied, referring to the boosted gear. That's right, people like that require more than one piece, unless you possess a mutation piece, which can be worth more than one piece. It was Lord Citri's turn. Issei's brain began to work as he tried to interpret the information OBTI made so far, which was evidenced by him crossing his arms and wrinkling his forehead in thought. Then he stopped suddenly. The rest imitated him. Does that mean that one pawn mutation piece could replace the 8 that were originally used on me? He asked with doubt on his face. Exactly, Soten didn't have enough pieces to reincarnate you, except for his only mutation piece. That was what Serafall said. Then she looked at him with great seriousness. Yes, she used her mutated knight, said the Mao, assuming her true facet for a few moments to emphasize her answer. The boy opened his eyes upon hearing what piece it was now, feeling a great impact at the tone used by Serafall to the point of visualizing the piece in his mind and understanding his role in the group. Then he lowered his gaze as thoughts ran quickly through his mind. So now I'm a knight, I see. Although the sword is not for me, I will have to learn to use one, he thought reflectively. Still with his arms crossed, he looked up at the ceiling. It still won't be easy, he thought again. This time he looked a little unsure. Don't think about that now, Lady Citri said it while placing a hand on her cheek. The brunette came out of his thoughts when he felt the soft touch, looking at her with doubt. First we must make sure that you are okay, then you can resolve your doubts. From today we will be here to help you, said the matriarch Citri in a warm tone. The boy closed his eyes, then sighed and looked at her again, although this time he seemed calmer. Hi, Lady Citri, the boy replied. Ofufu, call me Sanai, Issei-kun, Lady Citri corrected. Hi, Sanai-sama, the boy replied with a wide smile. The feeling it gave him reminded him of his mother when she gave him advice. Sigmund. Now let's continue, he intervened with Lord Citri. Hi Sigmund-sama, said the brown-haired boy when he understood what Lord Citri had said. Serafall smiled seeing this, as the brunette would cause a lot of commotion in the underworld, starting with having survived the extraction of his evil piece. Perhaps he would be an important factor in taking power away from the council in the future. Without further ado, everyone continued on their way through the halls of the castle. 1 hour later, Issei was lying on the bed in the room assigned to him by Lady Citri. Studies on him ruled out any problems with his new vital organ, though he was still unable to deactivate the boosted gear at will, so a machine was used to extract the excess dragon power in his arm. This power flowed through his body through the blood from his heart, increasing his physical abilities little by little. Obviously the results would be seen in the long term, or in a short time depending on the training to which it was subjected. He trembled with fear and excitement as he remembered the glow in the Leviathan's eyes, which told him that she already had plans for him. Now he looked at the ceiling lost in his thoughts, unable to sleep. Drake, the boy suddenly spoke while placing his left hand at the height of his face. A light appeared on the back at that moment. What's up, partner? The dragon asked. I should think you've had several carriers already, right? The boy asked. Yes, why the question? Drake replied. Then someone must have known how to use a sword, or at least be able to confront someone with a high level of skill in its use, said the brown-haired boy. That's right, there were several of my bearers who were skilled in the use of swords, as well as various weapons. That was what the dragon said. I've been thinking about it, remembering the raiding game, where Kiba faced the Knight of Riser. I can say that he won thanks to his sacred gear, combined with his skill and speed, said the boy with a serious expression. True, though let's not forget that both combined their techniques to take several pieces out of the game at the same time. Welsh Dragon confirmed. He was surprised that his bearer thought of that detail, being the boy he is. I wanted to ask Kaicho this question, but I can't wait, so I'll ask you. Do you know any magic that resembles Kiba's sacred gear? The boy asked with some anxiety. This made the dragon very curious, as he was not expecting a question like that. I plan to learn how to use the sword, but I also want to be able to use a wide variety of them depending on my enemy and summon a specific weapon for each occasion. He explained his intentions. Drake remained silent for a moment when he understood what this was all about, managing to make the boy uncomfortable due to the tense silence that reigned in the room. Until he responded. In fact, I do know one, the re-equipment magic, was his answer. The boy acquired a gleam of curiosity in his orbs upon hearing the name of said ability. Re-equipment magic allows one to store different weapons or objects in a dimension of its own to which only the user has access. From there the required object is summoned to use in battle. The skill in using this magic is measured by the summoning time between each object, which must be as short as possible. The best user could summon weapons faster than the Gremory Knight summons them. It was the information given by Drake. Issei was extremely interested in it, to the point of imagining the great range of possibilities when mastering that skill. Although he also had to acquire different demonic swords to be a true knight, and counter Kiba's ability if they were to face each other in the future. He also thought about learning a couple more tricks to have up his sleeve, but he didn't know where he could find a good source of information for that. The Citri clan is known for its great medical knowledge, but also for possessing a library with great general content. I'm sure you'll be able to find what you're looking for there, he informed his host. The dragon found it encouraging that its wielder wanted to become stronger by learning real techniques, and not techniques that would put him to shame. Like the one accidentally used against Serafall. He realized that she was just like Rias Gremory, wearing a mask for appearances, but unlike the red-haired girl, her coldness and indifference were almost non-existent, and there was affection there. but the feeling that surrounded her was rather melancholy. It was as if she had abandoned herself. Well, as a demon who has lived a long time, she may have had bad experiences that left their mark on her, but that was none of her business. He was more interested in the fact that she had turned her attention to the brown-haired boy, which meant hellish training that could make him powerful enough to defeat the white boy. Wow, I didn't know that. Thanks for the information, Drake, the boy thanked him, standing up. Her comment brought him out of his brief thoughts. It's nothing, buddy, he replied as the green glow faded away. The brown-haired boy then got out of bed and left his room in search of the all-for-honor-mentioned library. Although he did not know where the place was, he decided to find a servant who could guide him. Main room of the castle. Both patriarchs were in their bed. While Lady Citri was reading a book under the light of a lamp, Lord Citri was resting with his eyes closed. Lady Citri muttered, stopping reading her book and looking up. Is something wrong, my dear? The patriarch asked without opening his eyes. Issei-kun has left his room, that was what the matriarch said. The room fell silent as they both felt the boy's energy signature. Then she met with the magical signature of one of the castle maids, so that later both of them headed together to another address that the patriarchs knew well. I see, it seems that he can't sleep and has decided to look for something to read, that was what Lady Citri said. The patriarch did not respond. The matriarch simply smiled and returned to her reading. Citri Castle Library? Enjoy your stay, Issei-san, the maid said, bowing before leaving. Thanks, the boy replied without taking his eyes off the place. The number of shelves full of books was immense, to the point of intimidating him a little. This will certainly keep me busy for a long time, he muttered with a tense smile. Not as much as you think, you just have to find out which section the information about re-equipment magic is in. Drake encouraged his bearer. That's true, although I want to look for other spells that could be useful to me, he said as he entered the library's corridors. The brown-haired boy read the contents of the sections, finding all kinds of information, until he came to the section on spells and incantations, as well as various types of magic. He went through the volumes and subsections looking for the required information. He picked up a couple of books that looked interesting, plus some on magic weapons and offensive and defensive magic. He found a book on reinforcement magic and another on analysis magic that might be useful to him. I was never good with magic, but I hope to at least master something from these books, he muttered as he carried a stack of books to a table. Then he began to review the copies, their indexes with the list of contents, in which he found quite interesting things, but after reviewing the information they were of no use to him. The minutes passed and the stack of books decreased, leaving him with only 5 books. Magic of Analysis. Reinforcement Magic. Re-equipment Magic. Great Magical and Mythological Weapons of History. Basic Magics You Should Know. Satisfied with his accomplishment, he set about placing the discarded books in their proper places, then taking the chosen books and returning to his room. In the middle of his walk back, the boy smiled at his initiative to become stronger, not to mention that in the future he could face the Gremory Clan or the Phoenix Clan in a raiding game, so he had to prepare some surprise for them. I didn't hold any grudge against them, I just wanted to show them their true potential. For his part, Drake smiled at his wielder's thoughts, since the Securitate of this generation could develop differently from the others, breaking the pattern and destiny of the Welsh dragon wielders. Let's see how you face the future, partner. Something tells me that you could become the strongest carrier in history. He thought with his mind about future battles. After all, power attracts power and strong enemies will come, although this time they will be in for a little surprise. Gremory Castle. Serafall was sitting on his throne, while he was having a conversation with another of the Mao. We will take care of the Hyodo family, let Rias-chan take care of her, bishop, and her new home, was what the hologram said. Then it will be so, Serafall, said the Mao Lucifer. She had contacted him to settle matters regarding the family of her sister's new knight. Rias would erase Asia Argento's memory and relocate her. Serafall was a little surprised by that, since he had planned to erase all information about Hyodo Issei from Kuo and let the girl live as a legitimate daughter of that family in compensation for the loss of the boy. But Serafall did not allow him to continue with his plans. The rewriting of Hyodo Issei's memories and his acquaintances and family would be carried out by the Citri clan, that was what the Mao informed him. Tell me something, how were your last minutes? He asked with utmost seriousness. He was still affected by the sight of the boy bleeding out with his chest open, and the conversation with Rias did not help to remove that bad taste in his mouth he had about it. For her part, the demon bearing the title of Leviathan remained silent with a serious and somewhat gloomy expression that surprised him. Then he simply denied it and cut off communication. The Mao let out a heavy sigh, bringing his hand to his face in a tired gesture. "Are you okay, Serafall?" his personal maid asked. She was standing behind her master. "To be honest, no, Grafia," was his pained response. The Crimson Satan bit his lip as he recalled the conversation he and his parents had with Rias, if he could really call the short talk they had with her a conversation. Flashback. The redhead looked with cold neutrality at the demons at the door of her room. They cringed slightly at being met by that emotionless gaze, until the matriarch stepped forward. "Rias. Why?" he asked in an affected tone. The redhead raised an eyebrow, before the corner of her mouth curved into a small, amused smile. "I really don't understand your question, since you must know the answer to your doubt," he answered while closing his eyes. The quartet fell silent after those words. They knew in advance that she turned cold to face her situation. Then Rias spoke again. "Although if I had to say it, then I would say that ignoring my feelings made me get rid of them," he said as he opened his eyes and erased his slight smile. This gained the attention of the Gremory patriarchs, Serafall and Grafia, who looked at her with some alarm. "Don't look at me like that. Remember that no matter how much I cried and begged you to give up on wanting to tie my life to someone like Riser, as well as using me as a bargaining chip without caring in the slightest about my well-being and feelings. You didn't listen to me," he declared while his gaze became more and more icy with each word. Rias felt hatred rising within her as she recalled the feeling of hopelessness, terror, and weakness that gripped her every day after receiving the bitter news. After all, their freedom was truncated by the selfish desire of some. No. Her freedom was truncated by the selfish desire of her own family, those who should look out for her well-being and love her. However, that did not happen. She found it hypocritical to say that the Gremory treated their servants like family, when they were playing with the lives of the family itself. However, I calmed those feelings down instantly. The intense coldness of his gaze made the Gremory matriarch step back, while Lord Gremory opened his eyes in disbelief at the change in his little daughter. Serafall was no better, as he clenched his fists to the point that his nails dug into his palms, drawing blood. Grafia lost her stoic expression as immense sadness took over her features. Meanwhile, Akeno, Koneko, and Kiba watched everything in silence. Seeing that expression on their king made them feel helpless in the face of what was happening. Akeno remembered that a year after she met Rias, she was notified of her marriage to Riser. Every night the redhead cried inconsolably for not being able to do anything, and she comforted her as best she could. Koneko had her gaze lowered, remembering the dark circles on her king's face, the result of his dedication to her well-being when he tried to help her with her problem after joining her noble title. But the places were reversed after a while, when it was she who gave her support and dedication to the redhead. Kiba gritted his teeth, remembering how little by little, the girl who had saved him that snowy night, and who gave him her unconditional love, that girl he considered his older sister, was losing her smile. The three servants remembered how the redhead had reached her breaking point, to the point that they took turns watching her so she didn't do anything crazy. All this without his family realizing his serious condition and attributing it to a childish reaction. She then seemed to get over it, and began to act normally around her parents and brother, reassuring them to a certain extent. So she began training in the use of her power and locking herself in the castle library for days. She then convinced her family to go study in the human world, where they hoped to lead a normal life as the girl had said. It was when he revealed his true nature to them, declaring that the Rias Gremory they had known had died, giving way to the cold reality before them. After that she asked them if they would follow her or go their own way. They couldn't leave her alone, and hoping that she would return to being the same Rias they knew in the past, they agreed to stay with her. From that moment on she closed her heart, becoming cold and calculating, showing the rest of the world that mask of the past, they being the only ones who know the real Rias. Now she had dropped the mask she put on in front of her family. Then Lord Gremory stepped forward. "You must understand, we did it for the good of the demons." It was his attempt to justify himself. He instantly regretted saying that, since for a moment he could see the hatred and contempt palpable in the aquamarine orbs that looked at him coldly. The other demons noticed it too, feeling their hearts contract at the thought of her hating them. "If that is your justification, then there is nothing else to talk about. You already have the answer to your question, so you can leave where you came from," he said, turning around again towards the balcony. His gaze was on the gardens of his home illuminated by the moonlight. Venelana and Xiaticus looked at each other briefly, sadness evident in both of their eyes. So it was Serafall who ventured to ask something the others couldn't. "Tell me, Rias, do you hate us?" he asked in a serious tone. The tone used concealed the fear of hearing a positive answer to his question. The redhead didn't respond at all, increasing her anxiety and fear to such a degree that she trembled a little. "Rias, please answer, daughter," Venelana asked in a small voice. However, they still received no response. Did you guys hear what Riser told me over and over again? The things he promised to do to me on our wedding night. Think back and now tell me, did you ever care about me?" he said as he turned back to them. This time his eyes had no shine at all and looked lifeless. Lord and Lady Gremory lowered their gaze. Of course they both heard what the third Phoenix son was saying, but they turned a deaf ear. They thought it was something young demons were doing, going through a rebellious stage, not realizing that with that indifference they were increasingly harming their little girl, who thought her parents didn't care about her. They now felt disgusted by all the things they heard Riser say, as well as feeling worse when they realized what their selfish actions did to their daughter. Then the last question completely destroyed them. When they looked up, it was like seeing a distant memory, as an infant Rias looked at them with a happy and loving smile as well as an innocent sparkle in her eyes. It was then that the image changed to a crying Rias curled up on the floor asking her Oni-chan for help because Tu-chan and Ka-chan weren't listening to her. The next thing was a gaunt red-haired woman with dark circles under her eyes and no shine in them in a corner of her room wrapped in her sheets, shocking those present. Finally, the current redhead was shown, who looked at them without any feeling, as if they were total strangers. Venelana fell to her knees, covering her mouth to silence the sob that threatened to escape her throat. Zeoticus brought his hands to his face as he backed up against the wall in a cold sweat. Serafall looked away with an expression of utter shock on his face. Grafia looked at her with deep sadness as she squeezed her skirt and did everything possible to keep her tears from falling. "I thought so. And regarding your question, unfortunately I don't have the heart to hate them," he said with a gloomy expression highlighted by his bright, icy eyes. This gave them a little hope, which died when they saw that expression and processed what the Gremory heiress had said. "I stopped having it a long time ago," he declared with a hollow smile. The four demons were heartbroken upon hearing those words and seeing that expression. As best she could, Venelana stood up, while Zeoticus approached her and took her hand. "Your engagement with Riser has been dissolved. You are free to choose whoever you choose," Lord Gremory said with a gloomy face and trembling slightly. "Ara, thanks for that. I think it saves me a lot of trouble," he replied, showing the attitude he used to have in his youth. However, they could see that his eyes conveyed nothing. It was as if all warmth in his soul had been devoured by the darkness of an endless pit of madness and despair. "Have a good night, Rias," Serafall said playfully as he walked away. Between him and his father they held Venelana, who showed an absent expression while Grafia followed them in a sepulchral silence and her head bowed. "Hi, good night, Okasama, Otasama, Oni-sama, Oni-sama," she said goodbye in a bubbly manner. The four demons trembled upon hearing this, but did not turn around. Lord Gremory and Serafall gritted their teeth in guilt, while a pale Venelana Remy neighed in shock and a gloomy Grafia finally let her tears flow. With nothing else to say and not wanting to bear this sight any longer, the four demons left the room. Flashback end. Serafall suppressed the chill that threatened his being as he recalled that cold, empty gaze. "We can only hope that their stay in the human world will return to what it was before," he said in a hopeful tone. Now that the marriage contract was annulled, her sister could regain her humanity and normal life in Kuo, so it was decided that she would return to her regular classes and be exempt from her duties as administrator for a time. This was so that he could relax and have a normal life like any human teenager. With the same thought and feeling her hope growing, Grafia nodded at what her husband said. Remembering how Rias killed one of her servants without any remorse still made her uncomfortable, as it reminded her of what she was like before leaving the ancestral Mao faction. Citri Castle. A certain brown-haired boy was lying in his bed reading the basic spells book, as he thought it was the best option for the moment. And he was not wrong. "Wow, these tips for improving control over magic and demonic power are certainly very interesting," he said with admiration. He was reading some exercises to expand his magical reserves, as well as suggesting meditation to focus his mind and have better control. This was going to be very helpful since his magic power control was terrible. "I hope I can improve in that aspect," he muttered a little depressed. "I don't think there's any problem with that, partner," the dragon said suddenly. "What do you mean, Drake?" the boy asked doubtfully. Your power is being influenced by the evil piece of the girl Citri. The flow of power is more controlled and therefore, you will be able to develop your magic without problems. That's what Drake said. The brown-haired boy opened his eyes in shock upon hearing this. Rias Gremorys' power was more unstable and inclined your power towards destruction. However, with Sona Citri's power, your aura is calm and more malleable to your will, in short. Drake said with some satisfaction in his voice. I will be able to use magic attacks and I will be able to teleport through the magic circle, the boy completed with a smile on his face. That meant the demon on a bike was left behind. With renewed energy, the boy proceeded to finish reading the book and then move on to the others. Then you will show me the memories of your fights to learn some movements from my ancestors, said the boy, sharpening his gaze. The next day he had to push his skills to the limit if he wanted to improve. Maybe I should introduce you to those two. I'm sure that between the three of us we can teach you something valuable and unique. Drake thought excitedly about the future. Human world, Hyodo residence. In the boy's bed, a certain nun slept, unaware of what had happened hours before in the underworld. Issei-san? Bucho-san? Come back soon, she murmured in her sleep while hugging the pillow with the scent of Issei. The dragon sprite that was curled up next to her raised its head as it looked at the moon through the window, sensing a great change in the world. Something told him that his mistress would be involved in this. But as long as she remained safe, her heart was pure, and he could be by her side, then he didn't care what happened to the world. Without further ado, he went back to sleep. Chapter 2. Forging. Underworld, Citri territory. A new day arrived and in a certain castle, a boy finished reading his first of many books. I was able to finish the basic spell book, he muttered after letting out a sigh. Then his gaze fell on the clock next to his bed, which showed that it was 6 a.m., so he adopted a serious expression, while remembering the events of the previous day. I wonder what happened to her, he muttered quietly, remembering a certain blonde phoenix. The last thing he remembered was having her passed out in his arms before falling unconscious. He shook his head and got out of bed. He then left the room as he looked for the bathroom to relax after a long night of reading. It didn't take long for him to reach his destination, remembering the route perfectly. He took off his clothes, leaving them in one of the available baskets, then grabbed a towel and entered the bathroom. Steam hit his face as he opened the door, then sat down under a shower and proceeded to wash his body. A new day was beginning and I planned to make the most of it. Underworld, Phoenix territory. A certain blonde with curly hair was writhing in her bed, her body covered in sweat. Oni-sama, he exclaimed, suddenly standing up. He was breathing heavily and his pupils were dilated. She remembered that when the pawn planned to end the match with a blow filled with sacred aura, she tried to protect her brother. Then a powerful heat was felt, and when she turned her head she could only see a vision that was completely covered in fire before everything went dark for her. Shuddering slightly at the memory, Ravel hugged herself. Honey, are you okay? Lady Phoenix asked, entering the room. When he saw his little girl trembling, he quickly rushed to her and hugged her. Okasama, he muttered without understanding what was happening. SHHH, it's all over now, you're safe, the matriarch whispered in a warm tone. Ravel's eyes filled with tears at that moment. Oni-sama, the blonde whispered in a broken voice. Then he cried on his mother's breast. At the door of the room, Lord Phoenix and Ravel contemplated the scene seriously. Riser behind them stood with his gaze downcast and a deep pain in his chest. Because of something stupid, he almost hurt his sister. If it weren't for the Sekiryute, probably right now. No, I didn't even want to think about it. He clenched his fists tightly as he listened to his younger sister's sobs. Why had things ended this way? Ah, yes. Because of the machinations of the council elders to which he was pressured. Flashback. A little 10-year-old Riser stood in front of the desk in his grandfather's office. This was a blond man, with violet eyes, very rare among the clan. With a sharp look and a stony expression that made you doubt if he really had feelings, or if he ever smiled. He looked 50 years old, but he was someone very old and influential. Do you know why you are here? He asked in an inflexible tone without looking up from some papers. He was reviewing some important documents. No, Ji-sama, the little blonde replied. The adult remained silent as he finished reviewing the document and signed it. Then she looked at him. You will be engaged to the Gremory heiress, the old man said. Tu-sama already informed me, but I plan to refuse, he replied again. The older blonde raised an eyebrow at the boy's response. "What are your reasons?" he asked without changing his expression. "I don't know anything about her, and I'm interested in someone else," he replied without hesitation. Of course, he was referring to a certain heiress of the Agar's clan whom he met at a party and established a good relationship with and currently had a strong friendship. The old man, for his part, made a pretense of a smile, if the trembling at the corners of his lips was any indication, then stood up. Riser felt intimidated, as he hardly ever dealt with this man in front of him, and his father looked stiff whenever he was mentioned. "Forget that kind of nonsense. Your duty is to preserve the pure blood of the demons. Your duty is to bring the power of the Bale clan and the Gremory clan to our bosom," he said while hardening his gaze. The little boy trembled, but did not shy away from his grandfather's gaze. "You have guts, but you have no choice, or you want your younger sister to take your place. We can offer her to some influential or skilled demon," he threatened subtly, or directly as the case may be. Riser drew an expression of horror at the words of the man in front of him, so swallowing his anger he took a deep breath in order to control himself, then showed a serene expression. "Is that all you wanted to tell me, Ji-sama?" he asked in a respectful tone. The old man nodded. "I'm glad you understood. Even though Roval is the heir, he lacks leadership skills. Renard has an advantageous position, but he's too lazy and doesn't listen to anyone, so the future of the Phoenix clan falls on you and Raval. Don't disappoint me. You can leave," he ordered without showing any emotion. The little boy bowed before leaving the office. The old man turned his gaze towards the document, where the signatures of the Phoenix and Gremory leaders could be seen, which endorsed the engagement between the third son of the Phoenix clan and Rias Gremory. Obviously this agreement was made because of the deep friendship between the two men. "Gremory is too naive. I didn't expect anything less from someone weak," he murmured with a touch of satisfaction in his voice. The current Mao were so easy to manipulate, and only served as the last line of defense against the other factions. Falbium Asmodeus used to ignore everything around him. Serafall Leviathan was too childish and extravagant even when acting in the council's affairs, being dangerous only at the mention of her younger sister, something that did not cause them any problem when knowing how to treat her. Ajuka Beelzebub was someone with a dangerous mind, but he used to lock himself away in his research, so he was out of the way. Serzex Lucifer was the most dangerous as he let himself be carried away by his feelings, in addition to having the support of Serafall and Ajuka in his proposals, making him the most influential of the four, but with this agreement they could keep him busy for a while. He would look for a way to free his little sister, so he wouldn't pay attention to the movements they would make from now on. The old demons had to prepare everything so that when the time came, true demons with the necessary temperament to rule the underworld would rise. They were not supporters of the ancestral Mao, but they shared certain ideas and had their own plans to prosper above the other factions. Like all demons, they were driven by their ambitions and did not care about erasing any obstacle in their path to greatness. Unbeknownst to him, Riser was outside the office, leaning against the wall next to the door. He bit his lips, causing them to bleed. His gaze burned with silent fury. "Do you think I'm just going to stand by and do nothing? You'd better watch your neck, although interfering in your plans sounds more satisfying than just slitting your throat," he thought grimly. No one threatened his family, and he emerged unscathed. He would protect his sister no matter what. Without further ado, he left the place in silence. Flashback end. When he met Rias Gremory he thought she was beautiful, but she was not what he was looking for. At first he tried to do things diplomatically by being polite to her and her parents, but that didn't work. Meh, it's not like he actually tried hard anyway. His initial intention was to get his hands on it, so as to frustrate the elders by putting off the matter of having an heir. But those guys kept him under surveillance, and kept telling him they were concerned that he wasn't trying hard enough to get the redhead. This began to stress him out, and the girl's rejections didn't help at all. During one of the meetings, the girl disappeared from sight, so he looked for her, finding her talking to her older brother, the Mao Lucifer. The redhead cried into his chest as she asked for his help to dissolve the marriage. Serzex told him that he couldn't interfere, but when he looked out he could see the Mao's gaze, realizing that he only said it through lip service due to his position. He could see that she really planned to do something to help her younger sister. This made him feel frustrated, since he did not have such support. His family was weak before the clan and council elders, so they would not help him even if he asked them. The Mao were no better, so he was currently alone. A resentment towards Rias Gremory began to rise within his heart. To hell with delicacy. His plans changed to crush her spirit, declaring himself master of her destiny, and what better way to demonstrate it than by telling her what her life would be like once they were married. When he first said it, he thought it was suicide, as in his resentment against Rias he forgot that his parents and older brother were present. An expression of disbelief graced his face for a few seconds as they took it as the beginning of the rebellious stage. Although he could sense Serzek's displeasure, Lord and Lady Gremorys' indifference left him cold. Because of this, he felt more pressured. Weak-charactered people did not deserve his respect. Little by little he forgot why he had started it all, dedicating himself to a life of debauchery to vent his frustrations, as well as verbally abusing Rias. He regained some of his sanity when Ravul joined his peerage, so he became a bit kinder, but outside of his peerage he looked down on everyone. Then a message from the elders arrived, pressuring him to speed up his marriage with Rias Gremory. Her parents and the red-haired girl's parents came to an agreement that they would marry once she finished her studies in the human world, but the elders needed to make sure they had a weapon in their hands, and what better than a super demon under their direct orders. It was then that he went to the human world. With his mind a little clearer given the proximity of his sister, he changed his focus and decided to take another route. He provoked Rias into a duel, seeking to see how determined she was and how prepared she was to try and change her fate. Perhaps she could be a powerful ally against those old men, but first she had to prove her worth and defeat him, or at least leave him in a weakened state so he could trust her and reveal his plans. Then came the rating game, where he was absolutely disappointed. Rias's poor performance showed that she was an immature girl who was overprotected by her older brother. Of her own pieces, her queen, Ubelina, and her bishop, Ravul, were the only pieces with real power within her peerage, and Rias's servants couldn't do much against the former. They were all weak, so much so that he took it out on poor Pawn, who defied him by getting up despite all his wounds. That was the reason Rias interfered and lost. Hearing that he had the Securite on his team raised his expectations, but when he was knocked out by Mira it made him doubt his potential. Then he knew that he had not been in the supernatural world for long. It's a shame, because the 10 days he gave them were not enough for him to strengthen properly. If he had trained at least a couple of months, then he would have been put on the ropes, because the obvious love he felt for Rias would be a good incentive to give his all in his duel and previous preparation. It was then that at her engagement party he burst into the hall. There was no doubt in his mind that this was Serzek's doing, which filled him with even more resentment, but he still accepted the duel. This time things were different, as this pawn had a few aces up his sleeve. When he was cornered and could see the mouse pleased look at the development of the duel, he felt his anger grow at the events manipulated by the red-haired man. He felt used, like when the elders decided his future and the responsibility was placed on his shoulders. Without thinking anything else, he recovered from the assault and used the remainder of his power to finish off the Securite, not realizing that his younger sister had intervened in the fight, as the Queen of the Mao had not announced anything despite his interference. When the flames died down, he could see the brunette with his back to him, the top of his clothes turned to ashes as he held something in his arms. His breath froze as he noticed a certain pink cocktail dress that he knew very well as he had bought it personally. It was then that he saw the boy's gaze, which conveyed great fury and reproach, which made him step back in fear. Then he fainted, losing the duel. Once everything was over, he was informed that by orders of the council, Ravul's intervention was not sanctioned and that he should thank his grandfather for suggesting this. In addition to the fact that being married to Rias Gremory, they could have the Securite in their hands to condition it in the most suitable way to their interests. Of course, the elders and their manipulations almost made him do something stupid. A huge relief filled his heart when he was informed that his sister was unharmed and had only fainted from shock. He then witnessed what Rias did to his servant. Oblivious to the scene, Riser couldn't help but smile in amusement as he imagined the old men's faces when they found out what that capricious girl had done. Thanks to that, they had lost a powerful weapon and they would regret it. Although with a clearer mind after what happened in the duel, the blonde felt sorry for the poor boy, because he made a huge sacrifice by giving his left arm to the dragon for a little power, earning his respect. It was at that moment that Rias coldly rebuked him, bringing him out of his thoughts, showing him a fraction of her power and leaving him stupefied. He then knew that the one in front of him was an existence that could be even more dangerous than the elders. The roles had been reversed, and she was the one testing him. He felt intimidated by that, but he just silently watched the outcome of it all, for in the end the boy's dying body to be taken by the Citri heiress and her queen. It seems I was wrong, you really found a way out of your despair. Or should I say that I created a monster? He thought as he watched the redhead leave the place, ignoring everyone. Sighing, the blonde pushed his father and brother away from the door, entering the room. His mother watched him warily as he approached, his eyes covered by his bangs. "Revel," he murmured without showing any emotion. The all for honor mention tensed in her mother's arms, but she managed to separate her face from the matriarch's chest and looked in the direction of her older brother. He came to the bedside, falling to his knees as his eyes became visible again. These conveyed deep pain, regret and fear. Then Riser reached out and held Ravel's hand, bringing it close to his cheek, feeling the softness of her skin. This touch made the blonde tremble slightly, but she did not move away. I am sorry I tried to hurt you," he said with a trembling voice. Those present were surprised by the fragile tone in the voice of the third son of the clan. However, it was Ravel who widened her eyes in disbelief as she felt a warm moisture where her hand made contact with Riser's cheek. Then he understood. A slight liquid flash confirmed what he never thought he would see. His brother was crying. "Oni. Sama," he said as he separated from his mother. She walked over to the edge of the bed, using her free hand to slide it behind the blonde's head, gently pulling him into her chest. Riser was taken aback for a moment, but couldn't refuse his younger sister's warm embrace. The rest looked at this in shock, because they did not think that the blonde would show this side. Lady Phoenix brought her hands to her mouth to silence the sob that threatened to escape her throat. Lord Phoenix brought a hand to his head, stroking his hair, as he smiled bitterly. Revel crossed his arms with a slight smile of relief. When he was calmer, Riser separated from his sister to look her in the eyes. She could see an enormous warmth that she had not felt for years, moving her instantly. Smiling at her with a hint of relief, Riser gently patted his younger sister's head, causing her to blush at the act. "Thanks, Samuto," he said it with such warmth that Ravel felt her chest shudder. She hadn't felt like this since she was little and used to follow her Oni-sama everywhere. Without further ado, Riser regained his dignified expression and stood up, turning around and leaving the room. His father and older brother simply stood out of the way without saying anything. Then he stopped at the door. "Don't misinterpret what happened, I just did what an older brother should do. Remember that thanks to your weakness and naivety things have turned out this way. I may have also gone too far with Rias," he said seriously, muttering the last thing. After saying that, he left the place. The touching atmosphere of a few seconds ago vanished, leaving in its place a heavy silence, because both parents knew what he was referring to. They knew about the pressure the clan elders put on Riser, but they didn't do anything about it as they thought this might teach him some valuable things. A naive thought to fool themselves into not getting involved with Rugal Phoenix, the head elder and Reynard's father. As he made his way through the halls, Riser walked with his hands in his pockets. Weakness and naivety, maybe I'm naive too, after all I've made a lot of mistakes, he thought with an ironic laugh. With what happened recently, the elders would leave him alone, not to mention that they would be more cautious regarding their decisions when losing a Longinus user due to their greed. With that train of thought, he went to see his peerage to talk to them. Human world. Sona Citri walked through the halls of Kuo Academy accompanied by her servants. Despite maintaining a serious expression, he was secretly reviewing what had happened in the morning when he arrived at the Hyodo residence. Flashback. Sona and Tsubaki stood in front of Issei's house door. They were waiting for the person sent by the Gremory Clan who would alter Asuya Argento's memories. In a flash, two people could be seen emerging from a magic circle. Rias Grafia-san, the Citri heiress, greeted cordially. "Good morning, Sona-sama," the silver-haired girl greeted seriously. The redhead kept her arms crossed and her eyes closed, so she did not respond to the greeting. "I guess it's time," Sona said before proceeding to ring the bell. Ding dong. Footsteps were heard, and a brunette woman opened the door. "Can I help you guys?" "Oh. Rias-chan, are you here to find Issei?" the woman asked with a cheerful expression. The redhead didn't answer, but her eyes glowed red as the woman took on a lost expression and the sparkle in her eyes disappeared. Without further ado, the quartet of demons entered Issei's home. Rias went upstairs to the boy's room, so that when she entered she found the blonde asleep in the brunette's bed. Then he approached her. Asuya, wake up," he said while moving her a little. "Ah, Bucho-san," he said when he opened his eyes. She sat up, rubbing her eyes and noticing the redhead's presence. "Bucho-san. I knew Issei-san would bring her back," she exclaimed while hugging her king. This was seen by Sona, Tsubaki and Grafia, who maintained their serious expressions even when they were affected by the blonde's words. Sona and Tsubaki for what would happen to the girl, while Grafia for everything that happened the day before. Of course he kept his promise, he even gave his life for it, the redhead replied with a smile. These lines shook the trio of demons behind her, as it was an unexpected comment that left them speechless at how raw it sounded after knowing the facts firsthand. On the other hand, the blonde, who was still hugging the redhead with tears of happiness, opened her eyes when she heard that, so she separated from her king's chest. Huh. Where's Issei-san? She asked as she looked around for the boy. Then she realized that they were not alone. Grafia-san, Kaisha-san, Fuka-Kaisha-san, she said while wiping away her tears. The silver-haired girl sighed before approaching the bed. I'm sorry Argento-san, but Hiyoto Issei no longer exists. Don't worry, you won't suffer for his loss after this, he said in a solemn tone. Huh? He said weakly without understanding anything. But before he could ask further, Grafia placed both hands on the sides of her head as her aura glowed. Asia's eyes lost their shine at that moment, while her consciousness began to fade away and slowly turn black. It scared her, but she couldn't do anything to stop it. Issei-san, she said with difficulty as a last tear fell from her eye. Then the girl closed her eyes, losing consciousness. It's done, Grafia reported as she held the girl. She noticed how the blonde was shedding tears even though her consciousness was gone, which stirred her insides a little. We have already fulfilled our duty, you can take care of the rest by yourself, Sona, Rias declared as she summoned a transportation circle. The All for Honor mentioned adjusted her glasses with her eyes closed while the redhead disappeared with Grafia and Asia. Both Citri demons fell silent, before the heiress let out a suppressed sigh. The aura around him was totally different from usual. His presence was more gloomy and cold, Tsubaki commented as a drop of sweat ran down her cheek. She was tense ever since the Gremory devils appeared. That's normal, the Rias we knew was just a mask, that's why it's better to keep an eye on her. We don't know what she's capable of and I'd rather not risk finding out, Sona said, crossing her arms while lightly biting her lips. Tsubaki didn't say anything, but she could feel her king's concern and knew it was well justified. Whatever, we must arrange everything for when Hiyoto-kun returns, he declared before heading out of the room. Her queen nodded at Sona's orders, so she followed her silently. Flashback end. I'll have to send Tsubaki to do a thorough cleaning in Hiyoto's room, he thought as he remembered the posters he saw there. Not to mention he'd probably have some material hidden around there. Then he paused for a moment, his gaze shifting to look out one of the windows overlooking the campus. I wonder what Hiyoto is doing right now, the heiress thought with the image of her new knight in mind. Underworld, Citri Castle. At this moment, Issei was using some common exercise artifacts from a gym in the human world that were modified by Lord Citri. The sound came from his mouth as he lifted his own weight on some bars. When you finish the 200 repetitions we will continue with the weights, Sigmund Citri said while supervising his training. He had thought up a training regime for the boy during the night, taking into account his new characteristics to take him to the limits of his capabilities. Right now he was lifting his weight increased 3 times thanks to a gravity spell. You can do it, partner, remember that the stronger your body is, the more of my power you can use freely. Drake encouraged. The boy didn't say anything, but he didn't falter and repeated the movement, feeling the tension in his muscles. Lord Citri approached him as soon as he went down to the dining room to have some breakfast. His training would be divided into physical exercise, magical exercise, combat and technique, knowledge of the underworld. There would be 2 hours of each topic, with the physical and combat part taught by Lord Citri, while the knowledge would be taught by Lady Citri. The magic exercise would be taught by Lady Citri and Serafall when he had free time from his responsibilities as a Mao, in which case he would be under their care for the entire day, leaving aside the other classes. Lord Citri was wearing a blue sports tracksuit as he watched the brunette, who surprisingly had already done 190 reps. Come on Hiyoto-kun, only 10 more left, Lord Citri said with a serious expression. For the Citri couple this was entertaining in a certain sense, since they had some free time. Normally a servant's training would be under the supervision of his king, but since the boy's case was special, he had to be under the supervision of an experienced doctor. The purpose of monitoring him was to prevent any unforeseen circumstances with the boy's new organ, in addition to his nascent hybridization with his blood. This was the first time this had happened in history, or at least in the demonic faction, and it was fascinating. Sigmund knew that the boy had enormous potential if guided properly, so they were taking him under their wing in order to help him, and in the near future he would be the guardian of his youngest daughter. In that aspect they were no different from Serafall. Lord Citri was brought out of his thoughts when he saw the boy do the last repetition, before dropping exhausted to the ground. He was breathing heavily while sweating profusely. The brown-haired boy was only wearing black pants and sneakers, leaving his torso exposed, on whose chest a scar could be seen at heart level. "You did it, well done son," Lord Citri congratulated him with a slight smile as he handed him a bottle of water. "Thanks, Sigmund. Sama," the boy replied with a tired smile, taking the bottle. The man in front of him had him run around the site for an hour with the gravity doubled, then do push-ups. "Time is up for now. My wife will come so we can discuss the subject of magic," he said as he began to leave. As she walked through the door, Matriarch Citri was just entering for the next class. She was wearing sportswear consisting of black leggings, a blue top with white sneakers, and her hair tied in a high ponytail. Somehow it gave off a young adult feel. "I won't be able to help you with this every day, that's why we'll work twice as hard to help you learn to use your magic effectively," the matriarch said when she reached her side. This was true, as they used to take care of the clan hospital, and were sometimes away from the mansion several days a week. "So, any questions?" he asked kindly. The boy nodded. "You see, ever since I was reincarnated my magic power has been low to the point of not being able to use the magic transportation circle, but Drake told me that thanks to the power of the Citri clan my power found a certain balance, so I looked for easy spells to practice," the boy explained. Lady Citri nodded at every word the boy said, understanding his concerns. "I want to focus on offensive spells, can you help me when I don't understand something?" she asked in a shy tone. The woman smiled at this. "Of course, Issei-kun, I suppose you have an idea of some spells you want to try, right?" Lady Citri replied with a raised eyebrow. In response, the boy searched in his pants pocket, from where he took out a small notebook. "I spent the night reading a book of basic attack and support spells, writing down the ones that might be useful to me," he said with a little more confidence. The matriarch took the small notebook, then glanced at the first spell. Curiously, it was the teleportation one. She smiled as she saw how enthusiastic the brown-haired boy was, despite breathing heavily from the previous physical exercise. "Okay, start by trying to teleport to the other side of the room," the matriarch requested. Thus began the magical exercise. 1 hour later. A brown-haired boy can be seen sitting on the ground with his knees to his chest and a blue aura surrounding him. "Come on, it's not so bad, at least you've mastered the transportation circle," Lady Citri tried to cheer him up. "Don't be discouraged, partner, I'm sure there will be some other spell you can achieve." These were Drake's encouraging words. What was this scene about? That was easy. After successfully teleporting, the brunette attempted to cast the spells he had chosen for his own magical arsenal. Unfortunately, his magic skill was too low, and he was unable to recreate any spell, even to the point of showing no improvement no matter how many times he tried to do one. This obviously discouraged him. Also, as a knight your main weapon should be your sword and speed, Lady Citri added seriously. This made the brunette look at her with dead fish eyes, but at least it made him react. "Partner, there are still 2 more spells left, at least try to use them," Drake said this time. The brunette looked down at the notebook on the floor, where almost all the spells were crossed out except for 3. Teleportation magic through magic circle. Acceleration magic. Projection magic. This brought Issei out of his depressive state. "I guess you're right, I still can't rule out that possibility," he said as he stood up again. Without further ado, he took his notebook and read the description of the first spell. Saturate the nerves and electrical impulses of the brain with mana to increase processing and reaction speed, as well as strengthen the muscles to resist the temporary removal of the body limit. He silently read what he wrote the night before. This was the summary about a time-altering spell called Time Alter, which increased the user's speed. Despite the brief summary, he knew it wasn't going to be that easy, but he still didn't hesitate to try. Lady Citri just watched in silence as the boy regained his conviction from one moment to the next, smiling slightly at the scene. She sensed that Drake had said something to cheer him up again. Issei closed his eyes as he concentrated. The boy felt the mana running through his body, so he focused on sending it to the places described above. In his mind he visualized how the mana formed circuits, while a sensation of adrenaline reached his system. It was then that he opened his eyes and moved. Issei gave a push to move quickly, noticing how the world moved slowly. His movement led him to move around Lady Citri, who slowly turned her neck where he was passing, noticing how her surprised eyes managed to follow him with a slight delay. His perception of time and space was different from normal, and he even felt like he was moving slowly despite everything. It was like running on the bottom of the sea. But just as quickly as the effect came, it went away. His vision returned to normal, only to have him trip over his own feet at the suddenness of the event. "Gah!" he exclaimed when his face hit the floor. "Issei-kun!" Lady Citri exclaimed, running to his side. She carefully helped him to get up. "That hurt," the boy complained while rubbing his face. The matriarch let out a sigh when she saw that it was nothing serious. Then he smiled. "Congratulations, Issei-kun, you can use acceleration magic," Lady Citri said happily. The boy looked at her for a few moments, still rubbing his sore face, then showed an expression of surprise and then one of joy. "Woohoo! I could use real magic," the boy exclaimed happily, standing up and pumping his fist in the air. "Once you master this spell, you will be able to move at the same speed as the Gremory Knight, if not faster." It was the comment of a satisfied Drake. The brown-haired boy looked up at the ceiling with a big smile. "It seems that there are spells that you are more adept at. That would explain why you couldn't execute those basic spells, but this one could despite being a little more advanced." It was the contribution of a thoughtful Lady Citri. Issei looked at her doubtfully at those words, and then he adopted an expression of understanding and realization. "Then I just have to keep searching," he said while his eyes conveyed determination. But returning to his current situation, he took his notebook again and read the description of the last spell. Projection magic is capable of creating objects from the user's mana. The execution time varies according to the projected object. In order to use this magic, it is necessary to follow several processes and know the structure of the object to be projected. He read mentally. Issei meditated on the lines he had read. This spell was quite a troublesome one despite being basic, according to the spell description. That means you must know how the object is made, its components and processes at the time of its creation to replicate all that and create the object. It was Drake's contribution. "I see. I understand that it can be complicated. I'm not surprised. After all, it was the final spell in the book, and it specified that it was basic medium level in difficulty," he commented in his mind. Even though he knew in advance that it probably wouldn't work, something told him that he should at least try. Shaking his head, the brunette inhaled deeply, then exhaled and closed his eyes. Lady Citri watched the boy curiously, as the serious and focused expression he displayed was far from the boy Sona had described the night before. She knew what the last spell was, but above all she knew that it wouldn't be that easy for the boy to learn, not to mention that it wasn't usable in battle. After all, she herself had mastered the graduation air spell to create temporary objects. But seeing the decision in his eyes, he decided to keep quiet and wait for the result. I just hoped he wouldn't get depressed again. For his part, Issei tried to visualize something he could project. It had to be something simple that didn't require much of a process. So he decided on a weapon. A dagger. He extended his hand forward where a concentration of mana began to gather in his palm, which began to take shape. It doesn't have to be something so elaborate, the handle, the blade, the shape, the material. The boy thought, imagining the weapon. His forehead wrinkled in a gesture of extreme concentration, while profuse sweat ran down his face, neck and bare torso. Still, it didn't stop the process. For her part, Sanai Citri opened her eyes in admiration when in a flash, a dagger had appeared in the brunette's hand, who still with his eyes closed his fingers around the hilt. Then he opened his eyes. Ugh, he let out a heavy sigh as he swayed slightly. His gaze dropped to his hand, where a simple dagger could be seen. It seems it is possible to do it after all, he murmured with an enlightened expression. It's quite surprising that you were able to do it on the first try, Lady Citri said as she approached him. His gaze fixed on the object the boy had created. Yes, but I feel like I failed after all, the boy replied with a slight grimace. The matriarch looked at him doubtfully, before raising an eyebrow when the boy held out the gun to her. Lady Citri hesitated for a second, then took said weapon. As soon as he held it in his hand, he realized something. It doesn't weigh anything. In fact, it's very light, he said seriously. He then turned and threw the dagger at a dummy on the site, where it shattered as soon as it touched it. I see, you were only able to create a superficial object, its interior was hollow, the matriarch said as she looked at it again. Yes, it still took me work and a lot of mana to get that empty shell, but at least I understand how this magic works, the boy replied as he sat down on the ground. His mana level was low, not to mention that as soon as the adrenaline wore off, his muscles were receiving the charge after the previous acceleration spell. Normally this magic is used to create disposable objects. Since it is not usable in battle, almost no one uses this magic actively, except for the Mawajuka Beelzebub who uses it for his research. Lady Citri commented while crossing her arms. This action enhanced her breasts, which were not inconsiderable and of an ideal size for a beautiful woman like her. But Issei paid no attention to this and simply nodded seriously at what the matriarch said. Even so, I won't rule out this possibility. My goal is to hold on to the little I can master in the magical field and increase my chances of victory against an enemy, said the boy as he looked up at the ceiling. The matriarch nodded in satisfaction at the boy's goal. I understand. I think that for our first lesson it is enough. Take a bath and eat something, because you continue the combat training with Sigmund, and believe me, you will need to be in your best shape, said the matriarch with deadly seriousness. The brunette felt a chill at Lady Citri's tone, so he jumped up and proceeded to leave the room. The matriarch stood there, her expression extremely serious. His mind was on the previous scene. Strange, it was supposed to fail, not projecting an object. Even if it was a failed creation, it shouldn't have even been able to shape it. He thought seriously. Then he shook his head. It failed anyway, so it must not be anything relevant, he said with a shrug. Without further ado, he decided to go and rest a little. Although doubt persisted in the back of his mind. Citri Castle Bath. Issei was submerged in the warm waters, feeling its tiredness gradually disappear. Ah, this is paradise, he said with an expression of total relaxation. But then his expression turned serious. I didn't think my magic ability was so deficient. I listed more than 20 spells and only managed to master one, being the most basic. Another I will be able to use if I keep practicing, and the last one seems to be a waste of time to even try again, he muttered out loud. Drade listened silently to his host's monologue, agreeing to a certain extent, because despite everything they had had results in being suitable for speed magic. Projection magic wasn't that hopeful, but it could at least help him improve his magical ability in his development. For the dragon, the desire of its bearer to become stronger was more valuable than all the spells in the world. His strong determination and will were necessary to be able to master his power. Issei stood up, his stomach asking for something to eat, so he proceeded to leave the bathroom feeling clean and revitalized. 30 minutes later, Patriarch Citri stood in front of Issei in the training room. After finishing physical training, he had taken a bath and changed into his regular clothes. However, Sigmund had now only removed the top part of his suit, leaving him in a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up so they wouldn't get in the way. He held a simply designed European sword in his hand as he stood on guard. Issei wore sweatpants with a sleeveless shirt clinging to his body, as well as leather armor protecting his chest. He held a sword identical to Lord Citri's, as he got into an attack stance as Kiba had instructed him at the raiding game training camp. A drop of sweat ran down his cheek. It seems that Gremory taught you at least the basics. For now, show me what you can do, and from there you will be properly taught the basics of sword art, and then we will look for a style that makes you feel more comfortable, Lord Citri explained before rushing towards his opponent. Issei concentrated on the Patriarch's movements, managing to block the cut, causing him to shiver since they were real weapons they were using. Clang, 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 clang. The clash of weapons created a symphony of sounds that filled the room. Issei felt pressured by Lord Citri, as he realized that his level was far above him. He could see how it was pushing him to his limit, waiting for him to catch up before increasing the gap again. To his surprise, this method was working. Thus the brown-haired boy began to read the movements of the Patriarch Citri, narrowly avoiding blows that he could not block due to his slow reaction with the sword. Clang, clang, clang. Then came the moment where he was finally able to counterattack, but Lord Citri blocked his slashes with great ease. Then the difficulty increased and the process was repeated. It seems I wasn't wrong. This form of training takes advantage of the fact that right now you are assimilating the experience at a faster pace than normal. Ha! Lord Citri commented in the middle of the encounter, and then kicked the surprised brown-haired boy to the stomach. Gah! He exclaimed as he was sent flying. He rolled on the ground a couple of times before quickly getting back up and blocking a downward slash. Pay attention, even though we are swordsmen, that doesn't mean we don't use melee attacks, Lord Citri said, stepping back and attacking again. Damn. He's really getting excited, he thought when he saw the patriarch smile at the moment of attacking. Clang. 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 Issei managed to block the incoming cuts as best he could, so that his instincts would later warn him of the danger. Lord Citri widened his smile as the brunette jumped slightly to avoid the foot sweep he attempted, especially since he did it on instinct, and not because he saw the attack. So this was it, huh? Sigmund thought as he remembered what Drake had said. What was that? The boy asked himself when he was able to put distance between himself and his opponent. It's part of your change, your instincts are more developed and therefore they will warn you of danger. However, this depends on the reaction speed of your body. Now you could only evade the attack because the Citri demon did not try hard, but I think that from now on that is about to change. Drake explained. The brown-haired boy was about to ask what he meant, but when he saw the sparkle in Lord Citri's eyes he knew instantly. I'm screwed, he muttered with a blue face. 2 hours later. The brown-haired boy was lying on his back on the ground, breathing heavily and sweating profusely. There were slight cuts all over his body, especially on the leather breastplate that protected his chest. I was totally devastated. That was refreshing. It's been a long time since I've had fun and the castle soldiers lose their will too quickly for my taste, Lord Citri commented standing next to the boy. He had deployed at least 10% of his skill and the boy withstood his attack without backing down, and that pleased him. Even though he was eventually overwhelmed and could no longer keep up when his endurance reached its limit, the boy continued to push himself. You better take a break, you just need the lessons with my wife, he said while adjusting his glasses. The boy nodded as best he could. Lord Citri started to head for the exit, but stopped. Keep trying and you'll go far, I assure you, she said as she turned to him. The brunette was surprised by the small warm smile she showed before continuing on her way. This was enough to make him feel happy. Ah, he really had no mercy, she complained with a tired smile. It is better to push yourself now as you assimilate the experience at an accelerated pace, as we do not know how long this effect will last on you. A serious Drake said. This reminds me of certain online games, where they give you potions to increase your experience gain to a certain extent, but you only receive these benefits when you are a beginner, the boy commented, closing his eyes. His entire body ached as he forced himself to keep up with Lord Citri. The boy managed to get up and sit up. It would take some time before he could get up. He still didn't know what to do, whether to take another bath or eat something. Grrrr. Eating didn't sound bad at all. It took him another 10 minutes before he could get up and find a servant to ask for something to eat. Several hours later, Sona arrived home accompanied by Tsubaki. Much of the day he spent thinking about his new knight. Although she knew that nothing would happen under her parents' care, it did not stop her from showing concern for him. Tsubaki shared her, King's feelings to a certain extent, since the brown-haired boy was her new partner, in addition to knowing everything that had happened at the engagement party. When they arrived at the castle hall, he found his parents, who were sitting on a stone for all playing chess. Oh, you're back, Sona, Lord Citri commented after looking up. But the black-haired girl's attention was on the other stone for all. In it lay his new servant, wearing bandages on his body and having an expression of total exhaustion. Kaicho, he said with a tired smile. Still, he managed to raise his hand to greet her. Sona let out a sigh she was holding in, then adjusted her glasses and looked at him seriously. I see you didn't waste your time, that makes me happy, he commented in a serious tone. This made both parents smile slightly, as they realized that he had hidden what he really wanted to say. Of course, my wish is to be strong and serve you as best I can, the boy replied. Sona raised an eyebrow at the boy's comment. I appreciate your words, but try to think about yourself too, he said with a slight touch of evident concern. Tsubaki raised an eyebrow at the tone in her, King's voice, for she was rarely able to feel his feelings in this way. She supposed that what had happened that night, seeing the boy with a hole in his chest and smiling even as his life was fading away, had really hit her. And they couldn't deny it, she too had been affected by that scene. Surely both of them would be somewhat overprotective of the boy for a couple of months thanks to that persistent memory in their minds. She thanked them now that only the two of them witnessed that. She didn't want to even imagine the reaction of the most vulnerable members of the Citri group. In response to his, King's comment, the brown-haired boy looked up at the ceiling. I've been thinking about that recently and for the moment that's my only goal. I still don't know what else to do with my life apart from making my parents proud. That's what the boy said. This answer left Sona and Tsubaki silent. Then someone else decided to intervene. "What was your dream before, Issei-kun?" Matriarch Citri asked. The brunette opened his eyes at the question, while a blush of embarrassment appeared on his face. "I feel extremely ashamed of my tendencies, but my dream was to be the harem king and to be the strongest pawn. Now that has no meaning and I don't know what to do," the boy answered with shame, before looking dejected at the last point. "I see," Lady Citri murmured seriously. Sona just looked at her servant with concern. "I'm sure you'll find your wish at some point, so be true to yourself and try to live your way, listen to your heart and move forward," were the unexpected words of Lord Citri. "Tusan, Anada," Sona and Sanai said in surprise. "If you are ashamed of something, correct it. If you regret something you didn't do, don't waste time and do it. If you want something, fight for it. We demons live off our selfish desires. It is only fair that you also show some selfishness as part of the Citri clan," Lord Citri said with utmost seriousness. The brown-haired boy looked at him with his eyes wide open. Those words managed to ignite something in him that cleared up the doubts he had. At this he couldn't help but smile as if a heavy burden had been removed from his shoulders. "Thanks, Sigmund-sama," was the only thing he could say at that moment. Lord Citri nodded, a slight smile gracing his lips. "Fufu, that's the man I fell in love with," Lady Citri commented while holding a rather red cheek. Sona looked at her father with admiration. Even Tsubaki was surprised by Lord Citri's encouraging words. It was at that moment that a servant arrived. "Dinner is ready," he announced, then bowed and left. "Well, I think we shouldn't keep the cooks waiting," Lady Citri said, returning her gaze to the board. "Better luck next time, my dear," Lord Citri said as he made his final move. "Checkmate." Lady Citri pouted as she saw that she had lost again. "Next time you won't be so lucky," he argued, standing up. Sigmund smiled at the threat. Issei managed to stand up, while his stomach was crying out for food. Apparently his partial hybridization increased his metabolism because he felt hungry more often that day. I guess our conversation will have to wait," Sona said resignedly. Without further ado, the patriarchs and the heiress, as well as both servants, headed to the dining room for dinner. Phoenix Castle. The Phoenix family was having dinner quietly. Silence reigned in the dining room, but it was not uncomfortable at all. However, a certain blonde seemed slightly absent, something that was noticed by her mother. "Is something wrong, daughter?" Lady Phoenix asked with concern. "I just hoped it wasn't anything serious, or some after effect of what happened in the duel." "No, I was just thinking that I should thank the Gremory servant. As a member of the Phoenix clan, it is my duty to show my gratitude to my savior," he declared in a superior tone. Although an obvious blush was appreciated by all. Those simple words provoked a deafening silence, which was complemented by a palpable tension that immediately intimidated Ravel. "Is something wrong?" she asked shyly and nervously. This was due to the gloomy expressions on Riser and Ravel, the worry on their mother as well as the solemn expression on their father. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, darling," Lady Phoenix said these words in an affected tone. "Well, I just thought it was good manners to thanks," the blonde apologized quickly and nervously. Riser closed his eyes, cursing his luck again. Ravel and the Phoenix matriarch grimaced. Lord Phoenix took a huge breath, before looking at his daughter. "Child, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Hiyoto Issei, Rias Gremorys' pawn, has died," he said simply. Time seemed to stand still for Ravel. Although the boy seemed unpleasant at first, he proved his worth by resisting the fight against his brother to the point of getting up again and again, only to stop fighting when his mistress gave up. Then came the duel, where he demonstrated courage and bravery, as well as sacrifice by giving up his left arm in order to gain a boost of power. She also realized that she was very reckless and that her intervention could have cost her brother the fight, but to be honest, he had already been cornered to the point of being paralyzed. "Rias Gremorys' pawn was the one who saved you," were her mother's words after her brother left the room. She remembered how the fire clouded her vision, and then she felt warm arms surround her protectively, but the shock was too much for her, and she succumbed to unconsciousness. "Don't be afraid, I won't let anything bad happen to you." It was the last thing he heard. These events were enough for the young pawn to make a great impression on the girl to the point of feeling a growing admiration for him. But right now he had just heard something shocking. It was at that moment that he was finally able to process what his father had said, so he looked at him, unable to believe what he heard. What?" he said weakly. "Ria's servant lost the duel and was therefore expelled from her entourage, although she did so by extracting the evil piece from his body. I think you already know what happens in that case, Lord Phoenix explained seriously. Ravel felt his world shake. It was not possible. That was unthinkable on the part of Rias Gremory towards one of her servants. But then another revelation came to him. It was my fault, she thought as the image of the boy came to her mind. Don't be afraid, I won't let anything bad happen to you. She remembered his last words. A tear ran down her cheek before she passed out. Ravel! They exclaimed as they saw her collapse in her place. Luckily Riser caught her before she fell off the chair. The atmosphere became gloomy and the blonde simply lifted his younger sister into his arms. I'll take her to her room, he said and then left. The atmosphere left at the table took away everyone's appetite. Ravel knew that his sister would blame herself for the boy's death, which was complemented by the fact that he saved her, and he could not thank her for the gesture. This would certainly hit Ravel very hard. This is bad, Lord Phoenix murmured with concern. For the moment, the only thing I can think of is talking to Sona Citri to find out where he was buried and show our respects, or at least allow Ravel to do so, Lady Phoenix said with a grim expression. They were already expecting this reaction, especially when they saw their daughter blush, attributing it to her possible first love. They just hoped that when Riser woke up, he would be able to control the situation. Without further ado, the silence continued as no one made the effort to leave the table. Citri Castle. Dinner time had already passed and right now, Issei was sitting on the bed in his room, with Sona sitting in front of him on a chair. She had just explained to him the events that had occurred that morning at her home. Then silence enveloped master and servant for a few minutes. The Citri heiress had a serious and calm expression, but inside she was extremely worried about the boy's silence. The brown-haired boy, on the other hand, Remy made silent, with his eyes closed and his arms crossed. I see, I guess that's for the best, he said as he opened his eyes. Sona was taken by surprise by the boy's response. What? Was the only thing he could say. Obviously nothing unites us anymore. Right now I'm a stranger to her and that's something I approve of. I don't want to even imagine how she would have reacted if she knew what really happened. I prefer things to be that way, he clarified as best he could. Sona could only look at him in slight shock, not expecting such a response from the boy in front of her. Don't be so surprised, Kaicho. I may be perverted and somewhat dense, but I'm not an idiot. I also notice what happens around me and how this affects my family and friends, he added with a slightly mocking smile. Sona's eyes widened as she was caught red-handed, because she really thought that about the boy. I am sorry to think like that. I guess you have something more than lust inside your head and that took me by surprise, he declared, recovering and then adjusting his glasses, hiding his embarrassment. The brown-haired boy shook his head with a small, more natural smile. Don't worry, from now on I'll start using my head more often and I won't give you reasons to think that about me ever again, he said as his smile slowly faded and he took on a serious expression. Sona raised an eyebrow, but then smiled slightly. I see, then I have nothing to worry about, he said as he stood up. He silently walked towards the door, but stopped before leaving. You have a 2-month leave of absence. Take advantage of that time and be strong. Don't worry your parents anymore, he said and then left. The brown-haired boy just smiled amused at that comment. Seeing Sona leave her room, the boy fell onto his bed, his hands behind his head as a pillow. 2 months, huh? He thought carefully. It was only the first day of training, but he could feel a significant improvement. Although he also remembered Lady Citri's words. A knight only depends on his speed and his sword. He thought this time with unusual seriousness. Something about that sentence didn't quite sit well with him. After all, he knew that a knight was not limited to just using the sword. I'll do something about it later, was his last thought before he reached for his desk. Then he took a book. Structural Analysis. He had taken it because the title seemed interesting to him, and if it was what he thought it could be very useful to him. Good thing it's in Japanese. I had to narrow down my choices because most of them were in a language I don't recognize. I guess it was the demonic language, he muttered to himself. You should tell Lady Citri to help you with this. That's what Drake said. I guess I will, but that will be later. I will deal with my current options first, he said while looking at the 2 remaining books. Booster. Re-equipment. He was grateful that both books were thinner than the one he was currently holding. Whatever, he muttered as he opened the book and began reading. The next day, Issei had just finished doing his daily exercises with Lord Citri, so he was currently in his magic classes with Lady Citri. Right now Issei was using his magic trying to analyze a small rock. He held it in his hand, with his eyes closed and an expression of extreme concentration. He had only slept a couple of hours, as it took him a while to get through the book, not to mention process the information to understand it. It described how this magic could help him detect traps, as well as being able to analyze places he didn't know and determine what the terrain was like by providing him with a mental map. The book was thick because it listed different ways to use the spell, as well as the corresponding explanation. Sanai watched as the brunette tried to use structural analysis, although there didn't seem to be much progress in that if the boy's frustrated expression was anything to go by. Looks like it's another glitch, she thought, slightly disappointed. Oblivious to his thoughts, the boy's expression was not frustration, but stress. This was because he was trying to understand all the information that was reaching his brain in order to make sense of it, since the composition of the rock was not something he knew. Then his expression relaxed, and he opened his eyes. "Wow, I didn't expect to know this," he said, drawing a tired but satisfied smile. This caused Matriarch Citri to widen her eyes in surprise. "Wait, you were actually able to do that?" he asked in disbelief. Issei nodded. "I was able to find out what minerals it is made of, the processes that were carried out to create it, and its reason for being," the boy reported. This made Lady Citri raise an eyebrow, as something didn't fit with her explanation. "Don't you think that's a bit too elaborate for a simple rock I found in the garden?" the matriarch asked doubtfully. At this Issei smiled. "That could be said if it were a common stone, but it seems to be a fragment of an ancient statue of the first Lord Citri, and it apparently broke off when it fractured due to low temperatures about 195 years ago," the boy reported with a hand on his chin. Lady Citri opened her eyes in surprise, then one of her eyebrows twitched. "If I remember correctly, at that time a 16-year-old Serafall was beginning to show her dominance on the ice. That certainly explained how the right arm and part of the shoulder of the statue had mysteriously disappeared." "I see, you have certainly mastered quite a useful spell," he said with a small smile. The brown-haired boy shivered when he saw that despite smiling, a black aura covered Lady Citri. "But can you be sure of the information?" Lady Citri asked a little more calmly. At the question the boy became serious. "I am. If it took so long it was because all that information flowed through my mind and I had to analyze it little by little," said the brown-haired man confidently. "I understand. I suppose you will try it with other objects now," the matriarch pointed out. "Just a couple more. The information being added to my mind exhausts me, not to mention the painstaking use of my mana," the boy replied. "Well, then you will analyze this dagger and then this katana," he said while showing the chosen objects. If he could use structural analysis on both, then he could do it in a raiding game to find the weak point of the enemy's weapons. "Hi, Sanai-sama," the boy replied with a gleam of enthusiasm in his eyes. Lady Citri couldn't help but smile at this. It was normal for him to get excited about a spell he could use without problems for the first time, even if it was something basic among wizards. However, she did not take into account the details she was able to figure out on the first try, not to mention that she knew what that piece of rock was when a magician could only identify the object's materials and its internal structure. Yes, she didn't notice Issei's natural affinity for this spell. 3 hours later, Issei dodged several slashes made by Lord Citri in a more fluid manner than the previous day, indicating his improvement in the art of fencing. "Ha! You're definitely learning," Lord Citri exclaimed when his last slash was blocked by the brown-haired boy. "Kuh!" he compellinade, resisting the blow, but feeling the force behind it. Lord Citri sharpened his gaze before jumping back to create distance between the two of them. The brown-haired boy blinked at this action, then became serious and took a stance with both hands holding his sword tightly. "You've done well, but it's time for you to use the power of the piece within you. Now that you are aware of how to use a sword, it's time for you to assimilate the speed of the knight, so come with everything you have," Lord Citri said, positioning himself defensively. The boy opened his eyes at these words, for he had not noticed that. He had to attribute it to the fact that he was still thinking like a pawn, even though he was aware that he no longer had the promotion ability. Then Issei closed his eyes, searching for the connection with the piece inside him. It wasn't difficult for him to find the source of her demonic energy, so he quickly grabbed onto it. The boy inhaled deeply, calming his mind and letting the power of his piece flow, becoming familiar with it being a part of him. Issei exhaled, then opened his eyes. It was at that moment that he moved. He could see how in a flash of a second he was already in front of Lord Citri lowering his sword, which was easily blocked. However, the brown-haired boy overcame his brief moment of surprise and, assuming a serious expression, began to launch cuts towards his opponent. Sigmund set about deflecting the slashes, blocking some and dodging others. He quickly deduced the pattern and then counterattacked. The brown-haired boy showed slight surprise as he saw Patriarch Citri go on the offensive, but he still met him head-on, blocking each attack as best he could. Clang, 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 clang. The sound of metal against metal filled the training room, while sparks flew from time to time due to the meeting of both edges. Lord Citri saw an opening and attempted to strike, only to be blocked at the last second. He thought upon seeing this. Issei stumbled, but recovered and attacked. Another brief encounter of leaves arose, as Patriarch Citri noticed another opening. However, it was blocked again at the last second. At this, Sigmund raised an eyebrow. For his part, the brown-haired boy felt slightly frustrated at being pushed by Lord Citri into a disadvantageous situation. He noticed how he was playing with him, showing a higher level of fencing than the day before. Although this was only the second day of training, he still felt weak like the first few days serving Rias. How many times was he rescued because of his weakness? He then made a bad move that left him exposed. However, he didn't feel that vulnerable, and seeing the incoming attack he managed to block it at the last second. The brown-haired boy shook his mind and continued his attack. It was that he was again late in one of his movements, repeating the previous event. Clang. He could also block it. Then something came to his mind. This could work. But it's a bit suicidal. He thought a bit cautiously. Trying to prove his theory, the boy consciously let his guard down, noticing the incoming attack quicker and reacting accordingly, blocking the attack. I see this could work, but I don't think Sona would be very happy, let alone any decent knight. He thought, suppressing a grimace. Leaving an opening in his guard and reacting accordingly when it was taken by the enemy. He was only able to do so because of his reaction speed and that Lord Citri was still holding back. This was confirmed when Lord Citri frowned. 1 is a coincidence, 2 is a coincidence, 3 is a fact. He thought with some displeasure. The brunette then raised his guard and continued his assault, this time dodging when Lord Citri found an opening. 1 hour later. The brown-haired boy was lying on his back, breathing with difficulty. The boy was out of breath. Lord Citri sheathed his sword, then turned to look at him. That's all for now, by the way. I hope you don't use that suicidal style again, he declared in a neutral tone. The brown-haired boy had the decency to look embarrassed by the comment. I'm sorry. The first 2 times I acted on instinct when I was exposed. I realized this, and the 3rd time it was intentional, but I think it's too risky an idea, he replied between gasps. Sigmund's gaze softened at her response. I see, I guess it's normal that you've explored your options. Rest a little. History classes and the demonic alphabet continue according to what Sanai told me, she said before leaving the place. Issei was left recovering emotionally, as his resistance was quite low at this point. He certainly pushed me harder than yesterday, the boy thought. It's better this way, that way you assimilate more experience and increase your skills faster, Drake said in a rather pleased tone. At this the boy smiled. I guess you're right, the boy replied. Feeling his strength regain at some point, the boy stood up and began to head towards the kitchens, as his stomach began to protest for food. Ugh, it's been 2 days since I've needed a lot of food, he muttered as he walked through the castle's corridors. It's normal, your body and organism are undergoing changes due to your dragon heart. This requires large amounts of nutrients that are assimilated in your muscles, bones and organs, making you stronger and more resistant. Drake explained calmly. The brown-haired boy slowly processed his partner's words, understanding what he meant. I see, that is certainly very convenient, because this way I will be able to use more of your power, was what the boy said. The dragon nodded, although Issei couldn't see it. Without further ado, the boy continued on his way, feeling a tickling in his nose. Phoenix Castle. Riser looked out at the huge garden of his home from the window of Ravel's room. Things had become complicated in the Phoenix clan, all due to several mistakes and bad decisions by the Council of Elders and the clan members. The blonde had already expected an event like this, but he did not expect such a development with a reincarnated Longinus user or the expulsion of his group by his master. This would shake demonic society quite a bit, especially fueling distrust of reincarnated demons. He turned his gaze towards his sister, who was sleeping in his bed. He could notice the slight sweat on her face and the slight grimace she had. Walking over to her, he took her hand and leaned down to whisper reassuring words. I hoped I could deal with her when she woke up. If things get complicated, I'll have to talk to Sona Citri, he thought while narrowing his eyes. It was likely that he would not be well received by the heiress, but for his sister, whom he had caused so many problems in the past with his attitude, he would do anything. Even if he had to humiliate himself, he would do it for her sake without hesitation. He snapped out of his thoughts as his lips curved into a small smile as Ravel's expression softened. Don't worry, Amuto, Oni-chan is by your side, he thought with great determination. Gremory Castle. Another day of training had ended and Issei was already in his bed, while reading a book under the light of the lamp on the cabinet next to his bed. This was the re-equipment magic book. Create a space with your mana to store the objects. The boy read silently. The description was detailed, but not very extensive. He attributed this to the fact that most of the book described meditation exercises before beginning to master the spell itself, not to mention that it went into great detail about its applications and various strategies using this magic. Letting out a sigh, the brunette stopped reading for a moment, then closed the book, turned off the lamp and settled his head on the pillow. This was the second day and it felt like at least 3 months or more had passed. His routine was leaving him quite exhausted, but he couldn't object to her advances. Feeling sleep coming upon him, he quickly gave in and was asleep in no time. 10 minutes later. A certain brown-haired teenager can be seen sleeping, but sweating profusely as he writhed slightly on his bed. Opening his eyes, the boy stood up agitated. Issei felt his heart pounding inside his chest. He was breathing with difficulty. He brought a hand to his face and pressed his forehead hard. Are you okay, partner? Drake asked. Don't worry, it was just a nightmare, the brown-haired boy replied. Inside the boosted gear, Drake frowned. Since the nun incident, his host would have mild nightmares involving a certain fallen angel who murdered him. This was not something that happened frequently, but at least twice a week. However, this time it was different, as it had already happened 2 nights in a row. Drake suspected that this had to do with what happened with Rias Gremory. I guess I'll read some more, the boy muttered, turning on the lamp and resuming his reading. Issei would have tried to sleep again, but the night before he had some trouble getting back to sleep, so he wanted to take advantage of this sleepless night to advance his reading. A quick glance at the clock in the room revealed that it was 2 a.m. He frowned. He hoped this wouldn't last too long or it would start to affect his health, and he didn't want to worry anyone with his problems. Letting out a tired sigh, the boy resumed his reading. The next day, Issei, with clear signs of fatigue, left the finished book on the dresser next to his bed. He rubbed his eyes, then let out a yawn. He looked at the clock, which read 7 a.m. Her classes started at 10, so she still had 3 hours to spare. Getting out of bed, the boy grabbed a change of clothes and headed out of the room towards the bathrooms, looking forward to a long, hot bath before heading off to breakfast. Luckily, he didn't feel that tired despite losing several necessary hours of sleep. Arriving at his destination, he took off his clothes and left them in the laundry basket. He entered the baths and went to the showers, where he washed his body, and then entered the hot waters of the thermal bath. He closed his eyes for a moment, enjoying the warmth of the hot springs. His mind racing through the events of the past 3 days, taking him on a roller coaster of sensations that slightly overwhelmed him. His mind had been distracted by training and studying. However, in these moments that his mind had cleared, all the events had hit him at that moment. Even though he accepted it, it still affected him in one way or another. The betrayal. He thought about Sona and how similar his reincarnation was. However, this time he was allowed to choose, not to mention that this time he was able to see the true face of his savior. Sona's desperation to save him allowed him to trust her, unlike the situation with Rias where he forced himself to trust. Now he was no longer blinded by himself, and saw things as they are. Opening her eyes, they dropped to his chest. A large scar at the height of the heart. A reminder to be true to yourself. The first step was to get stronger, and thanks to the help of the Gremory Clan he felt that he would reach his goal in no time. Without further ado, he stood up, feeling his energy renewed, and he was eager to start his day. This is how he came out of the bathroom while drying his body. Several hours later, a satisfied and fit Issei was accompanied by Lady Citri, while analyzing a shield, a sword and a spear. Right now, he was applying the multiple uses of such a spell that he read in the book. He had tried to use the re-equip spell, but unfortunately he couldn't use it no matter how hard he tried, and so he focused on structural analysis. Sona knew this, and that's why she had these weapons analyzed. All the knights she knew used these weapons in raiding game, combat, and finding their weak point in combat would be a great advantage for the brunette. However, he had to master the spell to perfection in order to use it when crossing weapons with his opponent. Sona watched as he opened his eyes, smiling as he found the spot where he could break said weapons if he hit them hard enough. "I did it, Sona-sama," he said with a sigh. "I know, even though it took you 2 minutes. You must do it in less time, because in combat you will only be able to touch your opponent's weapon in intervals of less than a second, and it would take too long to achieve your plan," Lady Citri said in conference mode. "I understand, not to mention that a knight is not limited to carrying just one weapon," the boy said with a slight grimace. "Fufufu, don't be discouraged, you can still use structural analysis to find hidden traps," she consoled while covering her laughter elegantly. That was another advantage if the raiding game was of the dungeon or labyrinth type. The brown-haired boy just looked at her neutrally. "Ahem, anyway, I have some things to do, there's still an hour left so I'll let you practice your spells," he said after coughing uncomfortably. "Hi, Sona-sama," the boy replied, regaining his enthusiasm. Smiling at the boy's attitude, the Citri matriarch left the place, leaving the brunette alone. Silence reigned for a few minutes, and then the brown-haired boy looked at the weapons, which he analyzed seriously. Now I understood quite a bit about the materials of such weapons thanks to structural analysis. His mind wandered to his other magical abilities that had some future if he continued to practice. At this he felt his enthusiasm wane, for it was not much and that frustrated him somewhat. "Don't be discouraged, my friend. Your progress in these 2 days has been greater than what you had in the Gremory group during your stay with them." Drake tried to comfort him. The brown-haired boy smiled weakly. "I know, Drake, but despite everything I feel stuck," he answered in his mind. The dragon was silent for some time, processing what his host had said. "I see, I think I understand you and I have the solution to it," he said after several minutes of silence. These words encouraged the boy. "Really?" he asked, surprised. In response, Drake snorted. "I wouldn't normally do it this soon, but I feel like you've hit a wall and I feel like they can help you," he said with some resolve in his tone. The brunette blinked at the mention of them. "Who are they, Drake?" he asked, perplexed by Drake's tone. "Those who can best understand you. I mean those who mastered my power to the point of being called the most powerful Sekurite in history," he replied in a serious tone, surprising the brown-haired boy. "The most powerful," the boy managed to say. "Of all the former wearers of the boosted gear, 2 people distinguish themselves by not giving in to the darkness that lives deep within the Longinus." The red dragon explained briefly. "Former carriers. How can 2 people who are already dead help me?" he asked, this time with skepticism. Drake snorted again at the question. "Normally I wouldn't tell you so soon, but this time I'll make an exception. When a boosted gear wearer dies, a fragment of his soul remains within the sacred gear. Of all the wearers, only 2 are free of the curse, so they will be able to help you improve with their experience." The dragon explained in a serious tone. "I see. That sounds good," the brunette said with a smile spreading across his face. Then he realized a certain part of what Drake had said. "Wait, did you say curse? Is there a curse on the boosted gear?" he asked in an alarmed tone. "Yes, there is, but you will know later, for now you should focus on getting stronger," the dragon replied to its bearer. Issei remained silent for a few seconds, then let out a sigh. "If you say so, then I won't ask any more questions. I'm sure you'll tell me when necessary," he conceded in a resolute tone. He then realized that he had been talking loudly, so he worried that someone had heard his conversation, but it seemed that there was no one around. "I didn't want to worry anyone about the curse, whatever it is. Keep practicing, buddy. I'll arrange a meeting with them tonight," Drake said, bringing him out of his thoughts. "Thanks, Drake. You are the best partner I could ask for," he replied in his mind. Without further ado, he began to project the weapons he had analyzed to see what results would emerge from knowing their structural composition. Chapter 3. Healed Soul. Dream. Right now you could see a certain red-haired girl of approximately 8 years old walking alone through a dark and sinister forest, with a lost expression and a trail of dried tears in her empty eyes. Once again Riser Phoenix had visited the Gremory mansion accompanied by his parents. The Phoenix and Gremory patriarchs happily discussed the details of their engagement to such a character, while she listened to Riser's comments about their wedding night, her future duties as his wife and what he expected of her behavior as his property, etc. Some comments were too explicit and in bad taste, but their parents ignored them and just laughed, commenting on teenage rebellion. At this, the third Phoenix son practically smiled with such arrogance that it disgusted him. Once they left, he spoke to his parents again about being against this engagement. But once again they told her that it was her duty as an heiress and that they were sure she would come to love him in time. Minutes later, Akeno and Koneko were with her as she cried on her bed, until she fell asleep. However, it didn't take long for him to wake up thanks to the nightmares. There beside her she could see both girls sleeping, which made her feel a little warm inside seeing how much they cared about her. However, that was not enough to calm her emotions, which were in total chaos, so, trying to make sure no one woke up, she got out of bed and headed towards her balcony. As the night breeze hit the skin of her face, terror and anxiety came back to her even stronger, and without knowing what she was doing, she spread her wings and flew into the night sky outside her family's grounds. He easily crossed the walls by flying over them, then ventured further into Gremory territory until he simply dropped to the ground and continued on foot. Letting herself be carried by her feet, she walked and walked without stopping, until everything around her became blurred by the tears that began to well up in her eyes again as she thought about everything that tormented her. His body and mind went numb as he began to think about his situation. Ever since she could remember, her parents always gave her everything she wanted and she never lacked anything, because they treated her like a princess. She received love from her parents and even her older brother, who sometimes exaggerated his displays of affection towards her, but despite appearing upset on the outside, on the inside he made her feel loved and appreciated. But now they were adamant and denied him his freedom. So she began to question whether it was just an object that they adorned and beautified as best they could before handing it over to the highest bidder for their own benefit. Just thinking about such an idea made her heart break into pieces. Now he wondered how much of the love expressed to him was a lie. She questioned whether the teachings of treating her servants as if they were family were followed by themselves, when she being family was treated worse than high-class devils do to their servants when she was sold by her parents. Thanks to these thoughts his heart began to darken without pause. Her parents, her brother, her sister-in-law, none of them cared about her, nor showed any interest in helping her get out of this nightmare. They didn't lift a single finger for her or comfort her when she cried at night. At that line of thought, his eyes lost their shine, becoming empty and lifeless. She didn't know how much time had passed since she left the mansion. She didn't even notice her surroundings as she walked robotically aimlessly, while a dark abyss was forming inside her, swallowing the good memories of her family, leaving a feeling of absolute desolation that was beginning to slowly consume her. Her feet kept moving as the path became more rocky and some bushes tore her sleeping robe. However, she did not notice this due to her mental state, and that is why she continued walking, unaware that several eyes were watching her from the darkness. Grr. A growl was heard, but Rias didn't stop walking. Then a monstrous wolf blocked her way, causing the redhead to stop when she noticed a huge shadow in front of her. She looked at the wolf with a blank expression. Then another wolf appeared behind her, growling with saliva falling from his mouth. It was then that several more monsters emerged from the shadows and began stalking her, snapping at each other as they rioted around her. Rias blinked as she felt a killing intent behind her. He murmured, looking over his shoulder. A wolf larger than the others stood staring at her with his red eyes, causing the others to stop in place. Grr. A simple growl was enough to make the other wolves tense, backing away even though they were already salivating at the idea of tearing into his flesh to feed themselves. Turning around and facing the beast, Rias tilted her head without changing her expression. "You are strong," he said in a neutral tone without changing his blank expression. His presence was different from the other beasts, as he exuded a bestial authority that triggered instincts that should not go against him. On the other hand, the other wolves were still surrounding her, and so she had nowhere to escape. However, Rias's mind was oblivious to her precarious situation as several flashes of memories began to enter her mind. These memories revolved around a certain truth of nature that I had completely forgotten. "Ah. It's true, the strong always rule over the weak," he murmured with some sparkle returning to his eyes. It was true, in demonic society power was a way to get people to listen to you. His brother, the current Mao, were a great example, as well as his uncle Zekrom and other powerful demons. However, the problem now was that she was weak, in mind and body. With that idea he knew what he had to do. Thus his blank gaze turned to a cold one as his fingers clenched, and his power churned within him, begging to be unleashed. The epiphany had struck her. Something so simple had escaped her mind as she allowed terror and despair to overwhelm her, blinding her completely. Then his lips curved into a cold smile, as his fingers were covered by the power of destruction. Now that he had a resolution, he was not going to sit back and do nothing. She also decided that in order to achieve her goals and not be influenced by anything or anyone, she would get rid of unnecessary feelings, in addition to using anything to turn things in her favor. It was at this moment that the princess of the Gremory Clan had left. "Tremble, for the goddess of ruin has awakened, and as an opening act, I will claim your lives in my name," she declared coldly as a powerful aura surrounded her. The wolves sensed it, and against all instinct they lunged at her, while Rias began to move, dodging the beast's claws and fangs in fluid movements that seemed like a dance. From her fingertips, the power of destruction unfolded in the form of threads that responded to her movements, defensively surrounding her as she intercepted her attackers. She could have erased them with her power, however, she wanted a more meaningful way to start her path to ruin, and what better than a massacre full of blood and terror, proving that she would not only erase whoever stood in her way, but she would tear them to pieces. It must be said that the sinister creatures paid the price for their wish, as they were easily torn apart by the threads made of the power of destruction. Rias then changed her mode of attack, covering her arms with her power, using her right arm as a sword, while her left hand was used to tear with claws made from the power of destruction, or protecting herself from attacks as an improvised shield of said power. Thanks to her small size, flexibility, quick reflexes and dance lessons, she decimated the group of beasts in less than 5 minutes. All with a crazy smile on his face as a last glimpse of his denied feelings. It was then that Akeno arrived, because she didn't find her in her room, so she went out to look for her. The reincarnated fallen one did not warn anyone, nor did she even wake Koneko as she ventured out to find her master on her own. To this day he never knew if that was a good thing or a bad thing. This was because when he reached the point where he could track his king, he saw a very chilling scene. Hundreds of dismembered bodies of demonic beasts littered the clearing in the dark, gloomy forest he had arrived at. A sea of blood and death was practically forming on the site. But the most shocking thing was the figure standing on the pile of corpses. A tattered white dress stained with blood, a dignified bearing as she stood contemplating what was clearly her handiwork, if the faint trail of blood on her hands was anything to go by. His body darkened from his waist to his head, his face and identity being just a dark silhouette in that gloomy place. However, the two bright crimson spots that indicated the silhouette's eyes pierced through her as they landed on her, causing a terrible chill to run through her. This was a hellish vision that shook her to the core. But she quickly forced herself to react, for she knew that dress even in its current state, and the figure was clearly of the same build as her, not to mention the strands of crimson thread that she knew very well. "Rias, what happened?" he asked when he was able to overcome his shock, and then quickly approached her while looking at her with a panic-filled gaze. Now being closer he could see her features and face, noticing how the redhead sketched a small smile, while her eyes regained their aquamarine color. Then she arranged one of her crimson locks behind her ear and then finally looked at herself. Don't worry, I just went out for a walk, but things got a little messy. We better get back, I think I need a bath right now," Rias said in a soft and natural tone. Akeno looked at her in disbelief at the change in her attitude after this afternoon. "Are you sure you feel okay?" the half-angel asked with visible concern. The redhead waved her hand in a dismissive gesture. "I'm fine, Akeno. After thinking a little about my situation, I came to the conclusion that it's not the end of the world," he said in a casual tone. This threw Akeno off balance, and she didn't know how to respond at the moment. "It's better to go, let's hurry. I don't want to worry Koneko and Yuto," she said with a cute smile while spreading her wings. Akeno watched her take off into the sky towards the Gremory territory, not knowing what to think about the situation. Then she looked at the sea of corpses around her, then watched her friend's figure get further and further away. Something felt terribly wrong. He felt a bad omen with Rias' sudden actions, especially because of her gestures and smile, because despite looking natural he could feel a hint of coldness in them. He shook his head and got rid of those thoughts. Perhaps she was just imagining things, so spreading her wings she flew behind her king, not knowing that her worries were right. Only years later, when they went to the human world, she along with Koneko and Kiba were questioned by their king about their loyalties and whether they would stay with her. It must be said that seeing Rias' icy gaze and neutral gestures almost made her shed tears, because there she saw how her worries that night were legitimate, but putting aside her chaotic feelings, she assured that she would stay by his side as well as her fellow noblesse members. They hoped that the Rias Gremory they met and welcomed them with open arms was still inside her, and that was why they would stay by her side, waiting for the moment where they would recover their rightful king. Out of the dream, his eyes opened slowly as they adjusted to the light coming through his bedroom window. She got out of bed, without alerting her companion that she was already awake. The long strands of crimson threads falling down her back as she stepped out onto the small balcony of the building. Rias looked out at the campus from the old club building, a contemplative look appearing on her face. It had been a long time since I had dreamed of that moment, when he left his weakness behind to take his destiny into his own hands. The morning breeze caressed her creamy skin, causing her to shiver slightly due to her nakedness. Then he closed his eyes. "It's been 2 weeks," he thought calmly. She didn't think she would abandon her mask so soon, but imagining Riser taking it out on the boy who almost beat him left a bad taste in her mouth. So she showed him some mercy by almost freeing her, and showing her a sight that delighted her quite a bit. A battered and defenseless Riser Phoenix, who was only able to emerge victorious thanks to the intervention of his little sister. Despite this, the fight was not stopped, which exposed the favoritism of the Council of Elders. Without opening her eyes, she frowned in annoyance. But their factions quickly returned to neutrality. She doubted that they would move and disturb her anytime soon, as the loss of the Sekiryute was a huge blow to the demon faction, especially with the rumor about the Hakuryuko being affiliated with Gregory, as well as another wielder of Longinus. Heaven had its own thing too with Zenith Tempest and its Psychen wielders, while the demons only had the Regulus Nemia. In terms of power, the demonic faction was at a disadvantage. Gasper has done a good job investigating all that, he thought while a small satisfied smile was visible on his lips. The little vampire used his computer skills to monitor the movements and information in the underworld about the other factions. Then her smile fell and she sighed and then went back to bed, while she covered herself with the sheets and clung to Akeno's sleeping body. Despite everything, his habit of holding something to sleep was real. So her eyes closed again, while a pair of honey eyes came to her mind. It was surprising that despite everything, Issei never showed hatred or resentment towards her in his eyes the last time she saw him. Rather, they conveyed surprise and a certain resignation that he calmly accepted. Until today, it was something that intrigued her. Without further ado, he stopped thinking about it. Sleep claimed her in no time. Underworld, Phoenix Mansion. Lord and Lady Phoenix were in the middle of lunch with Riser and Rivel. The family looked worriedly at the empty seat that Ravel normally used, since at this moment she was locked in her room as she had been doing since she found out about her savior's death. She had refused to go outside, and sometimes some sobbing could be heard when someone passed by her door. She had barely eaten anything and the situation was starting to get out of control for the Phoenix couple. "I think we should pay a visit to Citri territory. This can't continue like this," Reynard Phoenix said this, breaking the tense silence that reigned in the dining room. "We have already put it off for a long time. Work and clan matters have prevented us from communicating with Sigmund and Sinai," Lady Phoenix said this time with a serious expression. "Then we will do it today. We cannot postpone this any longer. Ravel needs closure to this episode of his life," Rivel added, leaving his cutlery on the table. Riser remained silent, even as he stood up and headed toward a hallway that led to the stairs leading up to the upper floors. "Riser?" Reynard questioned upon seeing his son's action. "I'll talk to her. I'll tell her that we'll go to Citri territory and hopefully we'll know what happened to her body. At least she'll be able to thank her," he said without stopping walking. The remaining Phoenixes watched him disappear down the hall with worried looks. They knew he still blamed himself for almost killing his sister, so maybe this trip would also help him put everything behind him. "Let's hope things turn out well," the Phoenix matriarch said with concern. "I'm sure it will be like that, my dear," Lord Phoenix consoled as he took his wife's hand and gave it a comforting squeeze. Rivel smiled slightly at the scene, lightening his mood a little. "I just hope Ravel isn't negatively affected when we visit her grave," he thought with slight concern. Still, he was confident that he could eventually overcome this problem. He was brought out of his musings when Riser returned, followed by Ravel with red eyes and slight bags under her eyes, evidence of her lack of sleep. Despite looking pale, a certain fire could be seen in her gaze, which caused the first son of the Phoenix clan to let out a sigh of relief. Apparently he underestimated his little sister's strength. "Onisama told me that we will go to the Citri territory," he said in a slightly hoarse voice. "That's right," We hope to be able to offer our respects to the young man who protected you, Reynard replied as he approached his daughter. Odelia was the next to approach and wrap her arms around her daughter, as it had been a while since she was able to do so since she had been locked in her room, not allowing anyone to enter except Riser, but only to leave some food and leave immediately. Of course, the third Phoenix son tried to cheer her up, but any attempt ended in failure. At least until now. Are you ready, daughter? The Phoenix matriarch asked in a soft tone. Ravel nodded, while tightening her skirt to control her anxiety a little. Then it's time, Reynard said as he prepared a magic circle. Roval, Riser, Odelia, and Ravel approached him, at which point he activated the circle and everyone disappeared in a flash of flames. Citri Castle. Sona was having a game of chess with her mother while Tsubaki watched, seeing her, king, frown in extreme concentration trying to respond to her mother's strategy. It was currently the weekend and that was why Sona had come to the underworld, dedicating the days without classes to keep up with the training of her new piece. At this time it was her time for sword training under her father, so her mother took her over to distract herself with a game of chess until it was her turn to instruct her in magic. Although it was more about monitoring the progress of the spells learned. Sanai then watched as her daughter moved her knight, figuring out her next strategy without a hitch, causing her to suppress an amused smile. It was at that moment that a servant entered the room. Sanai-sama, we have visitors, the servant announced, placing his hand on his chest in a gesture of respect. This earned the attention of the all for honor mentioned, as well as Sona and Tsubaki. Who? He asked with a raised eyebrow. She had not received visitors directly to her castle, not to mention that she had not been notified in advance, indicating that it was an unplanned visit. Lord and Lady Phoenix, accompanied by their children, the servant responded immediately. This caused Sanai to frown slightly, while Sona and Tsubaki briefly glanced at each other, conveying their bewilderment to each other, as this was a development neither of them expected. Did they tell us the reason for their unexpected visit? He asked in a soft and dignified tone. They said they will discuss it with you and Sona-sama, he replied in a respectful tone. This made Sanai wrinkle her eyebrows slightly. I see, tell them I'll see them in a moment, Matriarch Citri ordered, relaxing her expression. As you command, the servant replied with a bow before leaving. The two Citri women remained silent for a few seconds, before Sanai stood up, followed by a serious Sona. Let's not keep our guests waiting, she said while smoothing her dress. Sona and Tsubaki imitated her, and then the trio began to walk towards the hall. Any idea why they are here, mother? Sona asked in a serious tone. No, after everything that happened with the Gremory Clan, a visit to our clan is the last thing I would have anticipated, he replied with intrigue in his voice. Tsubaki looked at the Citri matriarch, noticing her searching her mind for any clue that might lead to the reason for this unexpected visit. When they reached the hall, Sanai and the girls recognized the family waiting for them comfortably on a stone for all. The only one standing was Riser, who had his arms crossed as he leaned against the wall. Reynard, Odelia, how long has it been? The Citri matriarch greeted in a kind tone. Seeing them enter the room, both phoenixes stood up to approach them. Sanai, the years go by and you still look beautiful, Reynard praised with a small smile, taking her hand and kissing it elegantly. It's good to see you after so long, was what Odelia Phoenix said as she approached the woman. They both hugged each other lightly and then kissed each other's cheeks in greeting. Sona-chan, look how you've grown, said the Phoenix matriarch as she looked at her with a smile. I guess this is one of your pieces, little Sona, Lord Phoenix said as he looked at Tsubaki. That's right, Reynard-sama, Odelia-sama, Sona replied in a serious tone. Shinra Tsubaki, queen of Sona Citri-sama, she introduced herself with a bow. She's quite cute, Lady Phoenix said upon seeing the girl's manners. So, what brings you to my home? Sanai asked after smiling at Ruvel, Riser, and Ravel in recognition. Ruvel smiled back, Riser nodded without changing his sullen expression, and Ravel gave a slight bow. Sanai, Sona and Tsubaki were sitting on one stone for all, while Reynard, Odelia, Ruvel and Ravel were sitting on another. Riser was still standing against the wall. At the question of the Citri matriarch, Lord and Lady Phoenix were enveloped by an unnatural seriousness, which made the young people present nervous. Sanai raised an eyebrow at the brief somber tint the Phoenix clan conveyed. Has Sona told you what happened at Riser and Rias Gremory's engagement party? Reynard asked in a serious tone. The Citri matriarch looked a little surprised by the question, even Sona and Tsubaki looked a little uncomfortable not expecting such a development. Yes, it was something. Unfortunate and a great loss, Sona replied when she put her thoughts in order. So you know that Ravel was almost seriously injured, or worse? Odelia said this time in an affected tone. Sona made a serious expression at that line, then looked at the remaining phoenixes. Ravel looked solemn, Riser looked oblivious, but she could see how his fingers dug into her arms and his gaze conveyed enormous regret. Then his gaze fell on Ravel, and it was at that moment that he noticed his disheveled state. It didn't take much thought for all the pieces to fall into place, so he closed his eyes and let out a huge sigh. Beside her, Sona had her eyes wide open as she noticed Ravel's state, having the same train of thought as her mother. We know that the council had something to do with that duel, but that doesn't take away from the fact that young Hyodo saved our little girl at the cost of losing the duel, Lord Phoenix said with a somber tone. Sona kept her expression unchanged, while Sona had her mind racing, having a slight suspicion as to why the Phoenix clan came to see them. Tsubaki just remained silent, although she couldn't help but worry a little about the current situation. Ravel was deeply affected when she heard about this, so we have come to find out where young Hyodo rests and offer our respects, or at least allow Ravel to visit the site, Lady Phoenix requested in a soft voice. Sona opened her eyes as both phoenixes lowered their heads slightly, with Ravel doing the same. Riser's eyes were downcast, but she could tell he was tense. Finally, Ravel looked at her hopefully. This made his heart a little tight. He could imagine how he must have felt when he was informed of Issei's death, it being his fault that he lost the duel. Added to the fact that he had saved her life, losing his own as a result. Then he looked at his mother, but she closed her eyes and crossed her arms. "It's your decision," was the only thing he said. Sona couldn't help but feel pressured. On one hand, she wanted to help Ravel, as it was clear that she was about to be devoured by guilt. However, she was suspicious of Riser being present, not wanting him to know the truth and act accordingly out of some resentment towards the one who almost defeated him. The third son of the Phoenix noticed the indecision in Sona's expression, so letting out a long sigh, he uncrossed his arms and approached the Citri heiress at a slow pace. When he was in front of her, Sona looked up, so that her eyes met Riser's. "I know I'm the last person you'd want to listen to, but I'm asking you to give Ravel some closure to this situation. I'm asking you with all my heart." "Please," Riser said with extreme seriousness. The eyes of those present widened upon hearing him say that, especially because the tension in his voice was noticeable as the words came out of his mouth, the last sentence being the one that sounded the most tense, almost fragile. However, Sona was speechless at the unspoken plea in his eyes. Still, indecision could still be seen reigning in the heiress's eyes, so Riser inhaled slowly, as he weighed his next words. "I admit that what happened with Rias is partly my fault, also leading to the loss of the boy. However, they were not the only ones affected by the decisions of the council and the clan elders," Riser expressed with a self-deprecating smile. Sona looked at him for a few moments, before she realized where this was going. A glance at the Phoenix patriarchs, who had looks filled with remorse, only confirmed it. "I see, I guess his attitude was to face his problems. Although I can't forgive him for taking it out on Rias by turning her into that. At least I can say that he came to his senses, and the effort to convince me to help Ravel is proof that he is trying to vindicate himself," were Sona's thoughts as she adjusted her glasses. With those thoughts in mind, she glanced at her mother and Tsubaki briefly, then stood up. Sona gave a small smile when she noticed that her daughter had made her decision. Sona looked at the Phoenix couple, then looked at Ravel, who looked restless and squirmed a little in place under her gaze. Then he smiled. "Very well, I think I can grant your request," Sona finally said. At this, the Phoenix couple felt a burden disappear from their shoulders, with Ravel smiling softly and Riser letting out a sigh he didn't know he was holding. However, it was Ravel who reacted most visibly. She stood up from her spot, and then hugged Sona and buried her face in her chest. Thanks very much," her voice was heard slightly broken. Sona gently stroked her head, her gaze softening as she felt the blonde's body tremble, with a slight sensation of dampness on her chest courtesy of the tears she shed. Sona smiled at the Phoenix couple, being reciprocated by them, while Tsubaki smiled slightly at her king's decision. Ravel managed to control herself after several minutes, having an expression of extreme embarrassment when she separated from Sona. "I'm very sorry to show myself in such a sorry state," she said with a bow. "Don't worry, I understand how important this is to you," Sona dismissed instantly with a light smile. Then that smile disappeared, and he turned to the Phoenix family. I think we've wasted enough time. If you want to follow me, he said as he walked out of the room. This confused Lord and Lady Phoenix, as well as Ruvel and Riser. What do you mean, Sona-chan? Odelia asked doubtfully. The All for Honor mention stopped, then looked at her over her shoulder. You also want to thank him, don't you? Besides, I think having the support of the Phoenix clan will be important in the future, he said and then left the room. Sona was the next to come out, shaking her head in amusement at her daughter's words. Come on, or we'll lose Sona-sama, Tsubaki said as she took Ravel's hand and pulled her gently. She let herself be dragged along without opposition, and then a confused Lord Phoenix was next as he walked hand in hand with his wife. Come on, Otuto, I must also express my respects, Ruvel said as he began to walk. Riser took a deep breath, then exhaled in order to clear his mind. Hi, Oni-sama, he said more calmly, as he walked with his hands in his pockets and caught up with his brother. The Phoenix family quickly caught up with Sona and Sanai, who were closely followed by Tsubaki and Ravel, noticing how they went deeper into the mansion. Everyone was wondering where the Sekiryute had been buried, suspecting that he had been sent to the human world to rest near his family, but apparently that was not the case, as they went down some stairs to the lower levels of the mansion, indicating that he lived underground. With such signs, the idea of Sona building a mausoleum for the boy crossed the Phoenix family's minds at that moment. They were brought out of their thoughts when they reached a huge set of double doors. We've arrived, Sona said, stopping in front of the doors. He then turned to the Phoenixes, looking at them with extreme seriousness, making them feel a little worried and somewhat self-conscious by the intensity of his gaze. Behind this door is Hiyoto Issei. I hope you can express your gratitude honestly as well as support him in the future, he said as he turned around and put his hands on the doors. What do you mean by backup, Sona-chan? Reynard asked doubtfully. They'll know in a few moments, he replied, glancing briefly over his shoulder. He then pushed the doors, which opened before everyone present. Instantly the sound of metal clashing against metal reached the ears of the Phoenix clan members. As they began to go deeper inside, they noticed that it was a fairly large room, with weapons hanging on the wall near the door and a storage room of what appeared to be props occupying several shelves on the far left side of the room. Looking further ahead, a pair of maids could be seen standing at the edge of some sort of combat arena. Sona walked towards that place, followed by her mother and Tsubaki, who was pulling Ravel's hand. The Phoenix clan looked at each other briefly, then followed the Citri, the sound of clashing metal growing louder as they advanced. Then they could see sparks appearing in various points of the arena, as well as the flash of metal swinging rapidly. Within seconds they were standing next to the maids, who upon recognizing Sona and Sanai's presence bowed respectfully. What are we looking at, Sona-chan? Odelia asked as she watched two blurs moving around the arena. However, Sona remained silent as she strained to watch the match, having difficulty getting a good look at both opponents. Reynard impassively watched his friend defending himself and attacking what he managed to distinguish as a young demon, instantly noticing that his skill was quite remarkable to the point of briefly surpassing the skill of his Sunrisers, Knights, and Rias Gremorys. That was because the speed he was handling was beyond that of a mid-class devil, perhaps matching that of a high-class devil. Then both opponents crossed blades again, only to stop in a struggle of strength trying to push the other's blade away while sparks arose from where the edges met. Haha. I'm surprised it only took 2 weeks for you to push me to 75% of my ability. I must say, your growth rate is terrifying, were the words of an excited Lord Citri. Her hair was a little out of place, and she had a small sheen of sweat covering her skin, her breathing slightly labored. Well, with a teacher like you, it was to be expected that he would improve. At a faster pace, Issei replied haltingly. That was to be expected, as they had already been in mourning for a couple of hours, evidenced by the cuts in their clothes, the profuse sweat and their labored breathing. However, a smile was visible on his face. Maybe, but don't underestimate your dedication, son, Sigmund pointed out in a softer tone. He could see her arms shaking from the duel of strength, so he decided it was enough for today. He then stepped back and backed away, then proceeded to sheath his sword, causing the brunette to blink in confusion. That's enough for today. You've made a lot of progress, but you've reached your limit. It's better to take a break while you assimilate the experience. Besides, it seems we have guests, he said while adjusting his glasses. The last comment confused Issei, so he scanned his surroundings, finally noticing his king, alongside Sanai and Tsubaki. When his gaze met Sona's, he could see the pride shining in her eyes, giving him some satisfaction that he met her expectations. That feeling was reinforced when he found the same sparkle in Sonai's eyes. It was then that he noticed the additional people that were with them, in addition to the expressions they currently had while looking at him. At this he limited himself to scratching the back of his neck, somewhat uncomfortably. Going back a couple of minutes earlier, you can see Reynard's eyes widen as the brunette's figure became visible to everyone present. Patriarch Phoenix remembered the boy perfectly because he had been present at Riser's engagement party, so seeing him alive was a shock to him. Riser was the next to go into shock, as he took a step back with an expression of total disbelief and shock, not believing what his eyes were seeing, as the vision of a brown-haired boy with a hole in his chest and his heart shattered came to his mind, which for him was a sure death sentence that not even the evil piece could fix when the damage was due to the extraction of said pieces. Simply put, a second reincarnation was impossible, and that was why his mind had shut down. Odelia and Ruvel did not understand anything of what was happening, so they only showed doubt, and Remy made silent waiting for everything to become clear. The last person to react to Issei's presence was Ravel. She was staring at the brunette's figure as if it were some kind of hallucination, so when he noticed her presence, and scratched the back of his neck uncomfortably, she took a step towards the boy, followed by another, so that her feet would then take her towards the person who was supposed to be dead. When she reached him, her hand rose to direct his face, but stopped halfway. She was afraid that Issei in front of her was nothing more than a dream or some kind of illusion brought on by guilt and remorse. Golden eyes looked at her in doubt, then widened slightly in realization. Then she saw him smile softly, as he took her hand and directed it to his own cheek, making her feel the warmth that her skin gave off. "It seems that you have been worried because of me all this time. Forgive me for not taking it into account. But as you see, I am fine, so stop blaming yourself, Phoenix-chan," he told her softly and with a warm tone. This was enough to cause the dam to break. Without Ravel realizing it, a tear slid down her cheek, followed by another and another. It was then that realization came to her. It was not an illusion. It was real. He was alive. "You're alive. You're alive. You're alive. You're alive," she began to whisper, then scream at the top of her lungs as she lunged at him. Issei was caught off guard, but managed to hold her as she buried her face in his chest. The brunette just smiled as he put his arms around her, feeling her stifle her tears and tighten her grip on him, as if fearing that he would disappear at any moment. Sona and Tsubaki wiped away the slight tears that formed upon seeing that scene. Sonai smiled at the boy's touch. On the other hand, Odelia and Ruvel looked on in shock as they finally understood what was happening. Ravel's reaction and words, not to mention Reynard and Riser's expressions, made the pieces fall into place, shocking both mother and son. To think that little Phoenix could be blaming herself for your death all this time. The boy heard in his head. Despite everything that happened in the hustle and bustle I was forced into, I never considered this situation. I can see the result of sleepless nights, and the way he looked at me, as if he was afraid I wasn't real. I'm an idiot. He cursed himself mentally. You shouldn't blame yourself, partner. Many things happened that saturated your thoughts. Even if you had known it was the Citri girl's decision whether to allow you to act. Drake said in an encouraging tone. Although seeing how she brought them here, I don't doubt that she would have pushed me to help her out of her guilty state. He thought with a small smile. He was then brought out of his thoughts when he noticed that Ravel's trembling had stopped, and that she felt a little languid in his arms. Looking down, Issei noticed the peaceful expression on the face of a sleeping Ravel, who was using his chest as a pillow. The brunette's eyes softened upon seeing this. I think it would be best to talk in a more comfortable place, Lord Citri suggested while wiping away his sweat with a towel handed to him by a servant. The other hoped to hand the brunette a towel, but with the girl in his arms it was impossible for the moment. I agree, Issei-kun, could you bring Ravel-chan with you, since I doubt you can separate her from you right now, Sonai said while putting her hands on the Phoenix couple's shoulders. Odelia and Reynard snapped out of their stupor at the contact, looking at their sleeping daughter in the boy's arms. Huh, the boy managed to say. He was confused about what the Citri matriarch had said, but then he noticed how Ravel's hands were clinging to his shirt tightly, so with a sigh the boy smiled slightly as he put one of his arms under her legs and then lifted her princess style. This brought Ruvel and Riser out of their daze, while the latter could still be seen shaken by seeing the brunette alive. Are we going? Sonai said as she started walking out of the room followed by Sona and Tsubaki. Reynard and Odelia looked at each other briefly, then saw the brunette walking towards them with his daughter in his arms, noticing how she had a peaceful expression while she slept after several days of insomnia. When the boy was with them, they began to walk in silence, giving brief glances to the boy as they walked through the halls of the mansion. Roval and Riser walked behind them accompanied by Lord Citri. A heavy silence reigned over the group as they made their way through the halls of Citri Castle, with the members of the Phoenix clan giving brief glances to the brunette walking with the youngest daughter of the clan fast asleep in his arms. They noticed how their hands clung to the boy's clothes, who tried to ignore the gazes of the Phoenix clan. Although seeing her up close and already asleep made him realize that Ravel Phoenix was very pretty. That thought made him blush slightly, but he composed himself and focused on following his king and the Citri patriarchs. It didn't take long for them to reach Lord Citri's private office, who entered and walked until he reached his desk, where he sat down while resting his chin on his knuckles hiding his mouth. Issei, Sona, and Sabaki stood beside him, while the Phoenix clan members occupied the long zone for all available in the room. Issei stood with Ravel in his arms, not knowing what to do. Letting out a sigh and seeing that his parents and younger brother were still stunned, Ravel stood up and approached the brunette. "Here, let me take it," he said as he extended his arms. "Ah, thanks," the boy said a little uncomfortably. However, the moment Ravel tried to take Ravel, she let go of the boy's clothes and wrapped her arms around his neck in a grip that was rather firm for a sleeping girl, as if she was subconsciously refusing to move away from him. Ravel and Issei blinked at Ravel's reaction, and then the brunette blushed a little and had an embarrassed expression, which worsened when he saw the blonde Phoenix's attempt to hide an amused smile. "Ahem, it seems you'll have to take care of her until she wakes up," he said in a disinterested tone as he returned to his parents and brother. Issei just stood there with a dumbfounded expression. "Take a seat, Issei-kun. It will take us a while to discuss past events, so you will need to be as comfortable as possible," Sigmund ordered in a soft voice as he addressed the boy. This brought the brunette out of his daze, and with a deep breath he headed to the small free couch in the room, taking a seat while Ravel sat on his lap, who relaxed her grip a little as she let out a sort of satisfied sigh and settled in to get more comfortable. The brunette used all his willpower to not show his embarrassment and discomfort at his intimate position with the sleeping girl. It didn't help that Ravel and the newly recovered Lord and Lady Phoenix had a strange glint in their eyes when they saw him. Well, even though the main topic here is to give your thanks to Issei-kun, it is logical to deduce that what occupies your minds is knowing how he survived the extraction of the evil piece by Rias Gremory. Sigmund began to speak with great seriousness in his tone. This caused the Phoenix clan to look at Patriarch Citri with serious gazes. "That's right, Hiyoto Issei-kun. We are truly grateful for saving our little girl, and we will discuss appropriate compensation for your actions. But the issue of you still being alive is a point that has shaken us to the core, and I think knowing the answer to this has become a priority here," Reynard said in a deep voice as he looked at the brown-haired boy. "I hope you're not going to say it was nothing. After all, we were convinced that you lost your life by putting Ravel's well-being and safety above your chance of victory against Riser." Odelia intervened when she saw how the boy began to open his mouth. A look of shock was visible on his face as he was anticipated by Lady Phoenix. "Do not belittle your heroic actions, young man. You must put yourself in our place and understand the reason for our position. But above all, you must see things from our daughter's point of view. Now tell me, what do you see?" said the Phoenix matriarch seriously. The brunette closed his mouth, and then his eyes lowered to Ravel's face. However, his vision was brief as his mind began to weigh the matter raised by Lady Phoenix. He used his analytical mind and thought about the possibilities, arriving at a certain order of events that led to this situation. Logically, the first feeling the girl might have would be gratitude or a slight infatuation with her savior. This was the case with some of the Gal games and Eroges I played. After recovering and asking her hero, in a tsundere manner, if he remembered this girl's actions, her parents, receiving the news of her death due to her intervention would shake her to her core. Days of insomnia due to nightmares and guilt. But somehow she managed to recover enough to at least try to visit his grave and thank him wholeheartedly. However, now he found that his hero was alive. He speaks to her, calming her tormented heart, shaking her mind and heart as she clings to him as if at any moment he might disappear. From this moment on, she will not want to be separated from him, driven by those feelings that she thought she could never convey to her hero and savior. In short, she to him. He swallowed lightly as he slowly closed his eyes, then opened them and let out a long sigh. "I see you're not as alien as you seem," was what Odelia said when she caught a glimpse of the boy's eyes. They were firm and free of doubts. But still, some conflict could be seen in them. Despite being only the fruit of a noble action forced by circumstances. "I am not worthy of such feelings," Issei said with a self-deprecating smile. Sona, Sinai, and Odelia could sense something else beneath his words, but they couldn't quite put their finger on what it was. Issei-kun, I understand that you feel ashamed of your past behavior, but you should see your selfless action as a starting point to improve yourself. You started well by strengthening yourself for noble reasons such as protecting your loved ones, not to mention that you show more of your analytical and logical side, which is fine in my book, Sinai said with a warm gaze directed at him. The brunette tensed slightly in his spot, staring at her with wide eyes, while Lord and Lady Phoenix looked at her in admiration for her skill with words. The brown-haired boy articulated without knowing what to say, while Lady Citri's words sank into him little by little. Unbeknownst to him, his heart healed a little at those words, but most of all, at the expression of the sleeping girl in his arms, who smiled slightly in her sleep as she snuggled a little closer to him. Then he closed his eyes and took a deep breath, then exhaled. Then he opened his eyes, which had a firmer look and a certain gleam of determination that surprised Sona and Tsubaki. I understand. I will take responsibility for my actions and I will take your words into account, thanks Sinai-sama, he said in a resolute but firm tone. The brunette pushed inside himself that feeling of lightness that settled in his chest when he accepted Lady Citri's words. Without knowing it, they would also have a great influence in the near future. Well, that makes me happy, Issei-kun, Sinai replied with a light smile. Ahem. Now, getting back to the topic, I think it's time to know how you're still alive, son, Lord Phoenix said when he came out of his slight stupor due to the words of the Citri matriarch. With those words, the atmosphere changed again to a more serious one. I see, so that's what happened, Riser said while looking at him with his eyes wide open. This gain made everyone's attention, who looked at him doubtfully. What do you mean, Otaro? Roval asked, looking at his brother seriously. But Riser didn't answer. Instead, he took out a box of cigarettes to take one and place it in his mouth. I apologize for this, he said as he summoned a flame in his palm that he used to light his cigarette. Then he took a drag and blew out the smoke, all before the questioning gaze of those present. Then her gaze fell on the boy who was still holding his younger sister. The dragon sealed in your sacred gear took your dying heart and replaced it. Isn't that right? He said after a pause. This question made the phoenixes open their eyes in shock, while Sinai and Sigmund raised an eyebrow in surprise. Sona's mouth was slightly open and Tsubaki looked at the phoenix with more marked surprise in her expression. Truly admirable if you could tell just by looking at my partner, demon of the Phoenix clan. Drake's voice was heard the moment the boosted gear appeared on his arm. The voice of the Red Dragon Emperor startled the Phoenix couple, as well as Roval and slightly Riser, who was more for being mentioned by the dragon. Also due to the hustle and bustle this caused, no one noticed how the little blonde had tensed slightly in the brown-haired boy's arms. Back with Riser, he recovered and took another drag on his cigarette. It wasn't that difficult. After all, I was already familiar with his aura when he handed over his arm for a power boost, Riser replied calmly. Then it was Issei's turn to speak. What Riser-san said is correct. Drake took my shattered heart and turned it into a dragon heart. Unfortunately, that was not enough to get me out of the clutches of death, and that was where my current king came in, Issei confirmed with a serious tone, then looked at Sona with a soft gaze. The Phoenix seemed surprised at every moment by the revelations that were taking place at that moment. I used on him my only mutated piece that could match the 8 pawns that Rias used when she reincarnated him. Now he is my knight, Sona said when she was the center of attention. The reincarnation boost was necessary for the new heart to function properly. Since dragons are beings with high energy reserves, said organ would not work from scratch in its new host without a powerful energy discharge. Drake contributed another piece of information. I see. I suppose being exhausted after the fight made it impossible for the heart to function after being converted. Am I wrong? Lady Phoenix asked seriously. Even 10% of his power would be enough, but my partner was completely exhausted. Drake confirmed in a serious tone. I see. We certainly didn't see this coming, young man. You really are lucky to be the first demon to survive the extraction of the evil pieces, was Reynard's comment, crossing his arms as he settled into his spot. The brunette just looked slightly embarrassed by Lord Phoenix's words. Regarding Sinai's words, I assume you are training to become stronger and face difficulties in the future, right? Lady Phoenix asked this time while looking at him gently. At this the boy nodded with a serious expression. I need power to face those who seek me in the future. Drake already warned me that power attracts power, and as host of the Red Dragon Emperor I will have powerful beings behind me, was the brown-haired man's response. Obviously there were more reasons, but he was content to state that reason. I understand, then allow me to lend you a hand in your magic training, Lady Phoenix offered instantly. Huh? The brown-haired boy said, being taken by surprise. My wife's forte is wind magic, while I lean more towards hand-to-hand combat, Lord Phoenix contributed. I can help you with your strategy and political education, as well as help you with certain connections in the underworld, Riser said, surprising the brown-haired boy even more, as well as Sona and Tsubaki. He noticed those glances, so he clicked his tongue. Then he approached Issei, then leaned down and looked him straight in the face. I'm doing this as a thanks for preventing me from doing something stupid, and if something happens to you, Ravel will be heartbroken, and as her older brother I refuse to see her cry. Do you understand? He said with a cold look. The brown-haired boy looked at him for a couple of seconds, then smiled slightly and nodded. I understand. I will also make sure that she is happy at all times, the brown-haired boy said confidently. Riser held his gaze for a few moments, then nodded and retreated back to the wall with his hands in his pockets. Both of the boy's parents looked at him with pride, while his older brother was the only one who noticed a slight smile on the blonde's lips. It seems that you are finally maturing, Otuto. Besides, I will also be calmer if Ravel is by the Securute's side, he thought with a faint smile. Unbeknownst to anyone, Ravel had woken up the moment the brunette told himself he was not worthy of her feelings. She would have been offended by me implying that she had feelings for him, which she didn't. She was just a little interested and wanted to get to know him better. But the tone in which he said it, and perceiving a slight touch of fear in his tone when he said it, prevented her from opening her eyes and claiming him. On the contrary, she was worried now. He had also been surprised by what his older brother and the boosted gear dragon had said, while trying to erase from his mind the imaginary image of a dying Issei with a bloody chest. The way it was described was too graphic for his taste. Then came the support of his family towards the young man, being surprised to hear the voice of his brother Riser offering him training and education, as well as feeling admiration for the brown-haired boy's goals. She knew a few things, including the fate of the red dragon bearers. After all, she had been in charge of researching the strategies and important information for the raiding game with Rias Gremory. Now she was blushing deeply at what her older brother had said, as well as the response of the young brown-haired boy. Stupid Oni-sama, she thought as she snuggled a little deeper into Issei's chest. In response, he tightened his grip on her, thinking she was still asleep, increasing her blush, but a smile could be seen on the young woman's face. Well then, what do you say, young man? Will you accept our offer? Lord Phoenix asked in a calm tone. For Sanai and Sona, it was evident that both Phoenix patriarchs were more relaxed, seeing how everything had been resolved and that their daughter would recover in no time. I would be a fool not to accept this opportunity. Although magic is not my strong point, my hand-to-hand combat needs polishing, and any knowledge of the supernatural world is welcome, the brown-haired boy replied with a small smile. In response, the Phoenix couple smiled. The eldest blonde then looked at the matriarch Citri. Problems with your magic? He asked with a raised eyebrow. Odelia knew that Sanai was excellent in magic, so she sensed that she was instructing the brunette, and therefore she could shed a little more light on the boy's training. Issei-kun took several books from our library and selected some pretty useful spells, but it is only suitable for a few, the matriarch said with a complicated smile. The brown-haired boy had a depressing aura around him because of what Sanai said. This made everyone's neck drop, except Riser, who stifled a giggle, and Ravel, who frowned upon sensing the brunette's mental state. He has an aptitude for time-alter magic, structural analysis, and projection, Lady Citri reported seriously. This made the other demons look at him with some doubt. Those are useful spells in their own way, Lady Phoenix said it with a hand on her chin. This made Issei cheer up. Really? He asked hopefully. He didn't expect anyone else to think that way, as Lady Citri did so as not to discourage him, but Odelia seemed to be more serious about it. Well done, mother, Ravel thought as she felt the change in the brown-haired boy's aura. On the other hand, Sona and Tsubaki listened to everything with interest since they were not aware of what Issei was learning from the matriarch Citri. Despite keeping an eye on the boy, they still didn't have all the details. Show me, analyze this and then make a copy, said the Phoenix matriarch while throwing something at him. Issei caught it, to see that it was a rather fine comb, made of what appeared to be gold. Issei blinked, but seeing Odelia's serious expression he took on the same air of seriousness and nodded. Invoking his magic, the boy proceeded to analyze the object, finding quite interesting details about such a piece. It took him no more than 30 seconds to analyze it, to his surprise. perhaps due to constant practice on objects of the same size. Then he extended his other hand, as in a flash a figure began to form. Among those present he was viewed with curiosity and interest. Although Riser only raised an eyebrow at the basic spells that even his bishop could do in less time. For her part, Ravil was quite blushing as she felt the boy's power on the surface of her skin. She could feel a powerful, pent-up power that was crying out to be unleashed. But at the same time it was warm and protective, however she could detect a slight touch of sadness deep within. She would find out what was causing that feeling and help heal it. But it was just to show his gratitude and nothing more. Thus, in a minute Issei was holding 2 identical combs in his hands. Although the most notable thing was that he was sweating profusely and breathing heavily. That little piece had taken away almost all of his magic reserves. Lady Phoenix stood up and approached the boy, then took both pieces in her hands. "So, what did you find out?" Odelia asked as she returned to her spot. Issei managed to control his breathing before answering. "It is a piece crafted by the first Lord Phoenix for his wife as a gift for their first wedding anniversary, which hides a blade imbued with phoenix fire for self-defense, as it can pierce any magical defense. Given to each clan heir as a future present to the matriarch of the Phoenix clan," said the brown-haired man as he wiped some sweat from his forehead. This caused Sona, Tsubaki, and Riser to widen their eyes in surprise. Lord and Lady Citri looked satisfied, while Lord Phoenix and Ravil raised an eyebrow in curiosity, and Lady Phoenix looked extremely serious. Zolar Phoenix used what he called solar gold, which is normal gold combined with mithril and melted at a high temperature. As high as the surface of the sun, which was possible due to his own fire, which reached that temperature, and that was why his fire was blue. In addition to using as a magic core a feather from the tail of his familiar, which was said to be a true phoenix. The boy finished saying. This created a deep silence in the place. Everyone looked at him with expressions of surprise and stupefaction. Surprise on the part of the Citri clan and stupefaction on the part of the Phoenix clan, since that was too much information for a simple structural analysis. Lady Phoenix took the original piece, while removing the handle of the comb, revealing a leaf underneath, which burned in a mysterious blue fire and which caused the temperature of the place to suddenly increase. Lady Phoenix smiled as she sheathed the dagger again. That was splendid, young man. You certainly have great compatibility with this spell if you were able to find out all that, said the Phoenix matriarch with a satisfied tone. He then put the piece away, to later show the replica, while he manipulated it and carefully observed all the details. The Citri got over their surprise and were now extremely proud of the progress the boy had made. The Phoenix, on the other hand, were still shaken by what was happening. Lady Phoenix then put the replica away and then smiled at the boy. It's a very well done job. Even I couldn't tell it's a copy if it weren't for the fact that I'm quite familiar with the original article, Lady Phoenix praised. The brown-haired boy smiled despite looking somewhat tired. I appreciate your words, although I still have to improve. That copy took away almost all of my reservations, Issei replied with a bittersweet smile. Value the fruits of your work more, young man. I am sure that you will go far in our society, especially now that you have our unconditional support, Lady Phoenix declared. This made Issei open his eyes. The Citri clan looked surprised, but then smiled, as they had expected this. Lord Phoenix and Ravil looked at her doubtfully, but one look made them realize that she knew something they didn't. Riser just snorted and crossed his arms. Ravil was internally glad, as this meant he could spend more time with Issei to get to know him better. Don't be surprised, we told you that you would have adequate compensation for your heroic act, and my wife has already spoken. If she has offered you our support, it is because she sees a great future in you, Lord Phoenix said in a serious tone. This made the brown-haired boy look at him with mixed feelings. Not to mention that you could be part of our family in the future, he added as his gaze softened and he looked at his daughter on the brunette's lap. Issei blushed as he understood what Lord Phoenix had said. His first impulse was to deny it, but swallowing the slight discomfort he felt, he limited himself to nodding stiffly. It didn't help that Riser was staring at him. For her part, Ravil was grateful that she had her face on the brown-haired boy's chest, as she was blushing deeply upon hearing what her father had said. Well, since everything is said, it is time to return home, Lord Phoenix said, standing up. Are they leaving already? Lord Citri asked doubtfully. We have many matters that we need to resolve. We postponed them all so that Ravil could have closure to this whole situation. Now that everything is resolved, we are calmer, and everything turned out better than I expected, Lady Phoenix said in a kind tone. I understand, then allow us to escort you, Lady Citri said as she took a step towards them. That won't be necessary, Sanai, don't worry, Odelia said with a small smile. The Citri watched as the phoenix proceeded to retreat, so a certain brown-haired man made himself known. "Ano, Lord Phoenix, aren't you forgetting someone?" Issei asked nervously. Then the 4 phoenixes looked at him at that moment, making him a little more nervous. Lady Phoenix smiled. "I think my daughter will appreciate seeing you once she wakes up, young Issei," Odelia said easily. "I hope this doesn't cause you any problems, Sigmund, Sanai," Reynard said, addressing the Citri patriarchs. "Not at all," as Odelia said, "Issei-kun's presence will undoubtedly be vital for Ravel-chan right now," Sanai replied with a small smile. "I will assign you a room myself," Sona said this time. "Then everything is settled," Lady Phoenix said with a smile, then continued on her way out of the office. "We'll see each other later," Lord Phoenix said goodbye. "See you later." It was Ravel's turn. "You better take good care of her, Hiyodo Issei," Riser said while looking at him with daggers in his eyes. The brown-haired boy watched as the Phoenix clan left the office with a drop on the back of his neck. Then his gaze descended towards the face of a sleeping Ravel, so letting out a sigh he could only smile with a certain irony, while gently removing some loose strands of hair from the girl's face. "Come Issei-kun, we'll take Ravel to one of the guest rooms," Sona said as she started walking with Tsubaki behind her. "Hi Sona-sama," the named one responded as he stood up. So with Ravel in their arms, the young demons left the office. Sigmund let out a sigh, running his hand through his hair. "Issei-kun is definitely someone interesting," Sanai said as she hugged her husband from behind. "I know, look, you have won not only the support of the Phoenix clan, but their unconditional support, not to mention that you also have Ravel-chan's heart," Sigmund said with a light smile. "Perhaps he can change the fate of all the bearers of the Red Emperor Dragon," Lady Citri said with some seriousness in her tone. "I pray for it, he is a good boy who will take care of our little one. Once he masters all his power I will feel more at ease if Sona is in the care of one of the celestial dragons," Lord Citri said with a serious and hopeful tone. Lady Citri smiled. She expected the same. "Not to mention that perhaps with this Serafall can relax a little more," Lord Citri added with some concern. "I'm sure she does, since Issei-kun has been here I've noticed how she is less tense," Lady Citri said with a small smile. Lord Citri relaxed his expression, then fell into a comfortable silence. Corridors of the castle. Lord and Lady Phoenix walked towards the hall, from where they would teleport to Phoenix territory. "What have you found out, Odelia?" Lord Phoenix asked seriously. He could see his wife lost in her thoughts. But her husband's question brought her back to the real world. "I didn't think Sanai would be able to overlook something of this nature, with her specialty being the magical arts," Odelia said with slight disbelief in her tone. This caused the 3 Phoenix males to raise their eyebrows in doubt. "Although I think I understand, these skills lean more towards thaumaturgy than demonic spells," he added in a more resolute and understandable tone. By now they had reached the entrance hall of Citri Castle. "What do you mean, Okasama?" Ravel asked doubtfully. In response, Odelia stopped walking, then looked at them and showed the comb from before. This caused the trio of demons to look at her with a raised eyebrow. She then proceeded to remove the handle, leaving the blade exposed as the blue fire appeared and the temperature rose suddenly. Obviously her actions raised more questions than answers, to which the matriarch smiled coldly. That young man found out information that a simple structural analysis could not reveal, not to mention that he was able to recreate an item with special properties that have been lost over time, he declared as the dagger cracked, then decomposed into glowing particles and disappeared from existence. Reynard, Ravel, and Riser opened their eyes in shock as they watched in disbelief the glowing particles disappear before their eyes. Now they understood what the Phoenix matriarch meant. Well, what they thought was the original article was a simple projection. Something unthinkable if not impossible, until now. Its power was lower than the original and its durability is a joke, but bringing a projection to this level reveals a unique talent, which makes me wonder how much it will grow in the future, and the impact it will have on the entire supernatural world, Lady Phoenix said as she acquired a serious expression. This hit the psyche of the Phoenix males. Hiyodo Issei-kun will be recognized not only as the Sekyute of this generation, but as a powerful magician if he takes his skills further. Only time will define his new title, but I am sure he will leave his mark on this world, she said while a small smile made its way onto her face. This brought the Phoenix male trio out of their shock. "By your side, Ravel will be able to be happy and fulfill her dream," he said and then invoked a teleportation circle. Lord Phoenix laughed as he understood his wife's intention. Only you, my love, he said as he stood beside her. Roval smiled as he shook his head and Riser looked thoughtful. Thus, with a less gloomy atmosphere than when they arrived, the Phoenix clan retreated from the place back home. Guest room. Issei carefully placed a sleeping Ravel on the bed in the room. She'll be comfortable here, and if she wakes up and makes a fuss, you can check on her since your room is next door, Sona said as she watched the brunette tuck the sleeping girl in. That's quite convenient, the boy said with a drop on the back of his neck. Taking one last look, the boy patted Ravel's head before backing away and heading for the door. I'm leaving Sona-sama. I still have some lessons left for the day with Sanai-sama, said the brown-haired boy as he left. Okay, don't overdo it, Hyodo-kun, the heiress Citri conceded. Issei looked at her for a moment and nodded before leaving the room. The Citri heiress stared for a while at the door through which the boy had left, without moving from her spot next to the bed where Ravel was resting. So, did you enjoy being in your savior's arms? Sona asked out of nowhere. Instantly Ravel's eyes widened in shock as she tensed under the sheet. Then there followed a period of silence, which was interrupted when the blonde sat up from the bed with a blush while staring at her. Sona then turned her face to look at her, suppressing a smile at Ravel's embarrassed expression. The blonde tried to say. There's no need to explain yourself. After all, important issues were discussed and it would have been disrespectful to interrupt the dialogue that was taking place. Sona interrupted while cleaning her glasses with a handkerchief. Ravel's expression grew alarmed as she realized that the Citri heiress had been aware of her from the moment she woke up, which made her even more embarrassed. Sona put her glasses back on, then looked at her and smiled slightly. I'm glad to see you're in better shape, but if you're having trouble sleeping, the next door is never closed even at night, Sona said as she turned around and headed for the door. Ravel, who had just regained her skin color, turned bright red as she babbled incomprehensible things. If you need anything you can call the servants. Rest, you need it to fully recover, he said this time in a soft and sincere tone. At this, the blonde calmed down. The Citri heiress left the room, leaving the girl to rest. Ravel looked at the now closed door. She felt her eyelids grow a little heavy, as she thought of her savior. The tone of his voice, his scent and his warm mouth engraved in her mind filled her with calm and peace, as she let her head fall onto the pillow and let out a small yawn. So, after 2 weeks he was able to fall asleep. That's it guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. With that, take care.